Welcome, everyone. If you heard that little bit before, you know where you can go steal a free squash racket at the moment while I'm sitting here. The Board of Selectmen meeting for May 4th, 2021 will come to order. I note that at the end of this meeting, we will vote to go into executive session to discuss the purchase, exchange, or lease of property on Ice House Road, and we will not return to open session. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order placing strict limitations on the number of people who may gather in any one place. This meeting of the Medfield Board of Selectmen is being conducted via remote participation, and no in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted. However, every effort has been made to ensure that members of the public who wish to may access the proceedings while in progress as provided for in the order. A reminder that persons wishing to view this meeting while in progress may do so by following the instructions on the meeting notice. All right, and I will also note that this meeting, like all of our meetings, is being video recorded, and we will begin by taking a moment of appreciation for our troops serving around the globe in defense of our country. Thank you. Our first item is a public hearing on the request of Power Home Remodeling Group, which is requesting a solicitation permit, and I would ask the clerk of the board to read the legal notice that was posted with respect to this hearing.
1 second. Oops. Oh, come on. Never mind. Notice is hereby given that under the provisions of Section 28 of Article 4 of the Town of Medfield Bylaws, a public hearing will be held on Tuesday, May 4th, 2021 at 7 p.m. on application of Power Home Remodeling Group, LLC, 201 Jones Road, Waltham, Massachusetts, to solicit in Medfield. All town boards and interested parties are invited to attend. Due to COVID restrictions, this hearing will take place virtually via Zoom. Please consult the town's website for instructions for participation in the hearing. Signed, Michael T. Marcucci, Chairman, Board of Selectmen.
And that was published in the Medfield Press.
It was advertised in the Medfield Press on April 30th, 2021.
I guess it's actually just the press.
The
now,
press, excuse me, the
Dover,
press.
Sherburne,
I stand corrected.
Medfield.
Yes.
All right. I will declare the hearing on this permit to solicit request open. And it looks like we have, is this Dean Cohen? Are you going to speak on behalf of the Power Home Remodeling Group?
Yes, correct.
All right. Well, what are you looking to do? And tell us a little bit about your request.
Yeah, so what our company does, my department specifically, is that we go door to door. We offer free estimates on windows, roofing, and siding. There's no obligations for anybody to do any work, and we guarantee the price for the future. So typically we go to each town in Massachusetts. We request a permit to solicit. So that's why I'm here today.
Okay. And what are you, like, what, do you have a proposal for the hours you're going to be soliciting? How long?
Typically we work Monday through Friday, 12 to 6. Saturdays we work from about 11 to 3.
Mm-hmm.
We don't work past 6 o'clock.
And sort of what period of time? From when till when?
As soon as we can get the permits issued for the duration that you guys allow it. So every town's a little different. Some are a week, some are a month, some are a year. So I'm not too sure how long Medfield allows the solicitation permits, but for as long as possible.
Well, we don't have a particular policy or rule on it, but they generally don't grant open-ended solicitation.
Of course.
And so,
yeah, I mean, 90 days would be more than enough. So when we go to a neighborhood, that's the only time we go there. So we won't go back. So it's really as big as Medfield is. I don't know if it's, maybe a week or a couple of weeks, but typically we would request a 90-day permit.
Okay. Pete, any questions?
Have you checked with the police?
We have, so my group of representatives, they have dropped off applications with the police department. So they're waiting on the Board of Selectmen's and the ad in the paper.
That's the only question I have.
Gus?
When would you like the the date to start? What would the start date be?
Probably next week, if you guys would allow it.
I don't see a problem with that.
Okay. Christine, anything from the police or anyone else with issues with this?
The police were fine with the permit, as long as you set the hours.
Okay. I think the request, it sounds like it's 12 to 6 during the week and 11 to 3 on Saturdays. Is that correct?
Correct.
And how do you deal with, obviously, some of the restrictions have been lifted, but if you're going up to people's houses, how do you deal with the COVID restrictions and taking care of those issues?
Absolutely. So all of our representatives, they wear masks when they're out there. We also keep a safe distance about 6 feet. We do get tested regularly, and a lot of our staff has been vaccinated. But yeah, if somebody's not comfortable, we walk away.
And have you solicited in Medfield before? Just out of curiosity.
Me personally, I have not. I'm not sure if our company has, but I personally have not.
Christine, you wouldn't know one way or the other, would you?
I don't believe their company's been here before.
So this would be a first time. Okay. The only reason I asked was to know if we had any track record that we ought to know about.
No, not that I know of.
And what's the nature of your business?
So we go door to door, and we
No,
offer
what do you
free-
sell? What are you selling when you go door to door?
Our department does free estimates, but the company is windows, roofing, and siding.
Nice, okay. Windows, roofing.
Yeah, so we don't sell anything at the door. We offer free estimates for people that are interested, and then our representatives will go and leave a free quote.
All right. Anything else from Peter Gus? No. Christine, anything?
Nothing.
Nick? Mark? All right, this is a public hearing, so if any members of the public have any questions or comments on this request for a permit, please put your name and address in the Q&A, and Christine will promote you to ask your question or make your comment, and I'll give everyone a chance to do that before we close the hearing. All right, it looks like we have no questions or comments on this, so I will declare the hearing closed. And Gus, do we have a motion on this request for a permit?
I move that the Board of Selectmen approve the request for a solicitation permit for Power Home Remodeling Group, dates to run from May 10th, which is next Monday, through August 10th, 3 months. Hours on Monday through Friday from 12 to 6, on Saturdays from 11 to 3, subject to any further guidance restrictions from the police department in response to the application.
Okay.
Second?
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Murby? Aye.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Cohen, and good luck.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
One request, I think we do usually request as well, it's been a little while since we've had a permit for in-person solicitation, but I think we do request that you let the police department know on the days that you're going to be out and where you're going to be, just so if they
Absolutely.
get a call, they have a sense that you're already out there, so.
Absolutely. Will do.
All right, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, good luck. All right, next, Town Administrator Christine Truweiler requests that we appoint David Henkels to the position of Conservation Agent for the Town of Medfield.
Unfortunately, Dave can't be here with us this evening. He's actually at a Mass Association of Conservation Agent Committee meeting. But Dave comes to us from the town of Townsend, Massachusetts, and is currently a Conservation Commission member in the town of Sudbury as well. And we highly recommend Dave's appointment.
And when would he be starting?
Today.
Oh,
We have to decide before midnight.
Pete, any questions?
No.
No question.
No questions from me either. That's great. And this will be a part-time, like the current
This is,
conservation agent?
yep, this is a part-time 20-hour-a-week position, and he will be working directly for Sarah Raposa as town planner.
Terrific. Well, hopefully at some point we can have him in so we can meet him, but
Absolutely.
his time is probably better spent at the conservation agent convention than here tonight. So do we have a motion?
I move that we appoint David Henkels to the position of conservation agent for the town of Medfield.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Murby, aye.
I think the new structure of having him report to Sarah is a good one, too.
All right. Oh, we do have a Q&A question on this from Chris Potts, 7 Curve Street, asking whether his assignment will overlap with Leslie's.
Yes, currently Leslie is set to retire in the month of June.
So they'll have about a month of transition time.
Correct.
Great, thank you. All right. Next, Maurice Goulet, Director of Public Works, requests the Board of Selectmen to approve the Medfield Complete Streets Policy.
Good evening, everyone.
Welcome. Well, I have to say there might be a mistake here because I think this is the earliest we've taken you in one of our meetings in about a year. You usually wait
Yeah,
like
I've been
2.5
punished.
hours of other stuff. So,
I've been punished for a while, I think.
all right. Well, tell us a little bit about this proposed policy.
Just want to let you know, many towns in Massachusetts have an approved complete streets policy active right now. They're able to get funding for different projects. What I'd like to do is read a paragraph from the policy just to give you an idea of what it's all about. The intent of the complete streets policy for the town of Medfield is to accommodate all street users by creating a street network that meets the needs of individuals utilizing a variety of transportation modes. It is the vision of the town of Medfield to formalize the planning, design, operation, and maintenance of streets so they are safe for all users of all ages and abilities as a matter of routine. This policy directs decision makers to consistently fund, plan, design, construct, and maintain streets to accommodate all anticipated users, including but not limited to pedestrians, bicyclists, motorists, emergency vehicles, and freight and commercial vehicles. So basically, we're trying to use these principles in our design of all of our roadway projects. And we currently practice that now. We do try to accommodate all these types of users, trying to make Medfield a more livable community by offering different modes of transportation. It cuts down on the carbon footprint. It also encourages people to walk more, to cycle, to get to different places within town. So with this policy, if it's approved, we would, the next step would be to develop a prioritization plan. And that would look at all different projects that would incorporate these types of principles and be able to prioritize these into the next step after that would be to actually take advantage and be eligible for funding for these projects. It's actually a considerable amount of money at times. I've seen up to $400,000 being used for different projects that we could actually get from the state. The state created this. It's a statewide program, and I think it's a good one. Like I said, we try to incorporate everything we can right now. But we're not confined to having to put bike lanes, sidewalks in every street that we rehab or reconstruct. It just says that we are, to the best of our ability and to the maximum extent, to consider creating these modes of transportation. If it's too expensive, I mean, we're not have to guarantee that we're going to be putting these in, but we want to make sure that we use these principles in our design of the roadway projects.
All right. Pete, questions?
So I gather that the having this is the essential thing that is needed to unlock the grant money. Is that
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. That's it. That's my big issue.
I'll make up for Pete's brevity, Mo. First question, who actually wrote this policy?
I put it together through with help from one of our consultants, but it's basically a combination of multiple towns that contributed to this policy. And I kind of put it together to kind of put to the mode of what Medfield should be looking at and what we look at now through our roadway program.
Okay. First, I'm on board with the purpose here. So this is I have a lot of comments, but they have, yeah, that's why we started you early today, Mo. I have a lot of comments, but they are comments about the way this policy is written. They are not comments about what I think you just described as the purpose of a policy that we might put in place here in Medfield. So understand, I'm not fighting the idea of wanting to do this. In fact, I applaud the idea of making it easier for people to bike, ride, walk, and ideally not have to drive as many places at the same time, that we're not trying to button up things to where just normal traffic can't make it through town. So
before you continue, Gus, I just wanted to just make a comment that the items and the content of this policy, going with the consultant, some of these are they're on a point structure that the state we have to have a score of an 80 to have this pass through the state as well as through the town. But if it doesn't pass through the state, we're not eligible for the funding. So that's why certain aspects are in here.
So, Mo, the state is unable to bribe me on my policy decisions.
Okay.
About what's good for the town.
Gotcha.
Okay, just so we're clear on that. And it may turn out, I'm going to go through this, and Mike and Pete, once you get the idea where I'm coming from, if you'd say, Gus, you've made your point, let us see your marked up version and stop talking. I'm more than happy not to drag everybody through this. General comment, I balk at using absolutes in policy statements. So every place that I saw all, I looked at very, very closely, because I don't know in many cases what all means. When we say all street users, I would much prefer that we identify what users we're talking about. I also balk when we say to the maximum extent possible, because again, it's an absolute. I have no idea what that really means. Mo, you basically made it sound like, well, we can look at it, and if it's cost, if we think we can afford it, we'll do it, and then we won't. I'm worried that somebody who has a different view of what our cost trade-off should be would look at our policy and say, your policy says you're going to do this to the maximum extent possible, and I define the maximum extent possible as simply physically possible. So a lot of my comments are editorial like that around the wording. And I want to just hit the highlights, and then I think, Christine, what I need to do is give you this with my comments, and then we can go from there. On the second page, just to illustrate where I'm coming from, there's the core commitment section, first paragraph. The town of Medfield recognizes that all users of all transportation modes, including but not limited to pedestrians, bicyclists, school bus riders, motorists, delivery and service personnel, freight haulers, emergency responders, are legitimate users of streets and deserve safe facilities. I will point out that there are motorized scooters, there are motorized bikes, there are hoverboards that are all forms of transportation, and yet I don't think we really want to commit accommodating all of those different forms of transportation on our streets. So that, just so you know why I don't like all, that's why I don't like all. Mm-hmm. I have a lot of, I'm not going to drag you through all these. I did have a question. The third paragraph down under core commitment, it talks about the town, all transportation infrastructure and street design projects requiring funding approval from the town of Medfield, as well as funded by state, federal governments, and federal funds for street and infrastructure design shall adhere to and comply with the town of Medfield complete streets policy to the maximum extent practicable. So when we use shall, that's a mandatory word legally, and yet we've qualified it to the maximum extent practicable. But the next sentence is, private developments and related street design components or corresponding street-related components shall adhere to and comply with the complete streets principles. And my question is, are we saying that's a lower standard for developers than what we're applying to ourselves? Because it sounded like we were saying the same thing, just using less words to say it. So you get where my comments are coming from, but you
Yes.
don't have to respond. If I go down there are exemptions to the complete streets policy. Item 2 is certain local and two-lane sub-collector streets where traffic volumes are generally low and the abutting properties are sparsely populated. I don't know what certain means. Based on, how do you decide which ones are in, which ones are out? The word certain is too fuzzy for me. Exemption 1, all transportation facilities that are limited to non-motorized transportation modes such as multi-use paths, pedestrian paths, bicycle paths, and walking and hiking trails. I'm saying these aren't even streets. These are hiking trails. Why are we even talking about it? Now, it may be it's exempted, so it's okay, but I'm wondering, I want to make sure we understand streets as being streets that we're using to make more available for multiple users. It's not every form of transport, going back to when, we actually had colonists and people here walking on trails and horseback riding, that doesn't apply. Exception 4, other town policies, regulations, or requirements contradict or preclude the implementation of this policy after such policies, regulations, and requirements have been examined and updated to be consistent with the Town of Medfield Complete Streets policy. To me, that's a circular statement. We're saying that if it doesn't comply, it's exempt, but before it can be considered exempt, it has to comply. It was a circular statement for this. Next thing, best practices, at the bottom of page 2, complete streets principles will be integrated into policies, planning, and design of all types of public and private projects, including new construction, reconstruction, rehabilitation, repair, and maintenance of transportation facilities on, adjacent to, and related to roadways as allowed by law and regulations. I don't know what that really means, because there's virtually every construction project is adjacent to or makes use of roadways, and I don't get the purpose of why the complete streets principles would be applied to construction of buildings. So I'm just not following the logic. The next sentence down on page 3, it's actually the second sentence of the paragraph. The context-sensitive approach to process and design includes a range of goals by considering stakeholder and community values on a level plane with the project need. I don't know what level plane means there, but it sounds like we could have a project that needs to be done, and if we have some stakeholders that don't want it done, it feels to me like this is stating that they have virtual veto power, because they're all on a level plane. So I don't understand, practically speaking, what that's going to do to our decision-making. Again, there's a bunch more places. Let me, I did this all in, for anyone who cares, I did this in yellow and green, so in red. So the red stuff is the objections, but the green, just to be clear, the overall goal of this approach is to preserve and enhance scenic, aesthetic, historical, and environmental resources while improving or maintaining safety, mobility, and infrastructure conditions. I'm in total agreement with that. So it's the overarching goals I like. It's all the details of what this policy states that rang a lot of alarm bells for me. On page 4, under implementation, third paragraph, the town will reevaluate prioritization of capital improvement projects to encourage implementation of this project. I understand reevaluating capital projects to ensure we've incorporated this. I didn't understand how this policy would drive reprioritization of capital projects. So I'm not sure, that might be one. If Mike, you're on the capital committee. I may be jumping at shadows here, but I don't see how this policy is going to force reprioritization of capital projects, is what I'm saying.
Mo, do you want to respond to that?
No, I think, like I said, a lot of this is the state looking to towns to commit to utilizing these principles in every project that we do. It's an understanding of trying to create multimodal transportation in town. And I know what you're getting at. And like I said, a lot of this shall and all are the key words they're looking for to approve this policy to the state for the funding. Like I said, many of these policies are written this way, and that's where I've gotten all this, a lot of this information from. So if I did take it apart like you have and edit it, we most likely will not pass certain criteria to get it the point structure where it needs to be. But I totally understand your reservation. So I will look closely at this. I'll work with our consultant to look closely at it and to see what they, because they deal with the state all the time on this.
So what I'd like to, I mean, I've made my point. First, has Mark Sorrell reviewed this? Mark, have you reviewed this? Like, I'm playing legal beagle here around the use of the word shall and will, and I'm the least qualified on this board to do that.
So
Okay.
to the chair, so the short answer is no, I haven't seen it. However, Franklin recently, within the last few weeks, adopted a policy that was vetted to our technical staff. It originated, from what I understand, from Sudbury. So people tend to take, as Mo alluded to, models from one place that work and then convert it to their own use. But I haven't looked at that for a while, but my recollection was it was more focused on the Franklin model was, and I don't know how that ranks as far as the state's concerned, but it did seem to focus more on strictly on the roadway and roadway infrastructure as opposed to.
So I think I've made my points. I'll provide Christine with a copy of this or with the original on this, so she has my comments. What I'm saying, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not qualified, but what I'm saying is I'm reading certain things in here that are around absolutes, around using all or to the maximum extent possible, that are undefined, and I'm seeing the use of the word shall in certain places, which I've understood is a mandatory requirement, and I have significant concerns about the legal exposure, this policy as it's drafted here, the legal exposure it introduces to the town by someone who thinks we should be doing more than we are, and then beats us over the head with their own policy. If we can't get state funding unless we expose ourselves to that legal exposure, my view is we should still be trying to do this and tell the state to go pound sand with their funds. Because I think that's the only way you give the state feedback that you don't get to bribe towns and then expect them to expose themselves legally so that somebody who has an agenda can force action that we never really intended. So I've made the point. You get the flavor of what my comments are. I do have the comments. I'll give them to Christine, and it would probably, it's not the intent of the policy I'm against. It's the wording of this policy as it's drafted.
Understood.
So maybe, in addition to Gus providing his comments to Mo, maybe Mark, you could take a look at this as well, just to see, 'cause I'm fairly confident that Mo is not intending to draft a policy that was going to expose the town to legal liability. Are you concerned, Gus, that someone would effectively sue the town to force the town to do something
Absolutely.
in compliance with
Yeah.
the policy? So that's one question mark as to whether anyone would have standing to compel the town to do something in compliance with the policy. The second issue would be where the portions of the policy touch on other developments. Would this then be grounds for someone who is opposed to a particular development to say, and the development should be stopped because it doesn't comply with the complete streets policy? So even if you couldn't, because I'd be more skeptical that they could actually compel us to do anything. Mm-hmm. That's usually a higher standard, although I'll defer to Mark's analysis on that. But it may be that some of these things can be dealt with in drafting and in wordsmithing, because I think I don't think any of it goes to the substance. I mean, I viewed this as more of an aspirational,
Yeah,
overall sprinkled with stuff that was, that was as written kind of prescriptive, although I don't know that it prescribed anything enforceable, right?
But if that benign view, which I totally understand, Mo, I think you have that same benign view of what this compels us to do is true, then I don't understand why the state would say, unless you use the word shall in this policy, you're not eligible for funding. Because what we're really saying here is, well, the words of the policy will say shall, but in practice, what we really mean is will, or will try. And so there's something disconnected between the state, which is holding to apparently very specific legal terminology, which is what I'm worried about, and our interpretation that I shouldn't be worried about it. Incidentally,
I'm not saying you shouldn't be worried about it. I'm just
Yeah,
saying,
well, I
I
mean,
think some of this stuff may be dealt with as a drafting matter without actually adjusting what anybody is intending to do with the policy.
Incidentally, as an aspirational, this may not fall under UMO, but as an aspirational goal for the town, this is structured around the streets, which says that our roadways define the framework within which we can provide these alternative modes of transportation. When it comes to things like bicycling and pedestrians, I actually would like us to take a look at the town and say we should have a bicycle network and we should have a hiking network. Those networks and road network, and those networks should all overlap where it makes sense for them to overlap. But our goal should be that if somebody who lives down in the south part of town wants to ride a bike all the way up to hospital, the state hospital, that we actually have a network, a roadway, a set of roads they can use to get there. Maybe some of those aren't on the roads. We're putting in a rail trail. Maybe the rail trail is both hiking and biking that gets people there. But we almost like if we could look at those alternative modes of transportation and how you actually navigate the town on those, regardless of whether they're on the roads or not, as a long-term goal, I would like us to think about that and not automatically assume these things are all on the same, on the same network.
All right, so it looks like and I'm fine deferring this until Mo and Mark and everyone has a chance to look at Gus's color-coded comments. And then we'll have you back, Mo. And I
Okay.
promise if you come back on this, you will also,
Will I be first or will I be last?
you'll be, no, you will.
I have more energy at the beginning, though.
You might want to be last.
Mr. Chairman,
I have to say, my first thought when Gus got started here is that I hope Pete managed to get dinner before tonight's meeting.
Mr.
So-
Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Sorrell.
yeah, just for your information, because I had to take a crash course in Franklin at the last minute to put this in form for the Franklin Town Council, the legislative body. Mass Highway has on their website a whole thing on this, if anybody wants to look there. It explains the program and it's a resource.
Okay. All right. So we will defer this and Mo will have you back.
Thank you very much.
Oh, Pete?
I would just add that I think that the Baker administration rolled out the Complete Streets program a year or two ago. And so that if we've been missing the grant money for a year or two, I think it behooves us to try to wrap this up as soon as we can and try to get some of the grant money.
Very good. Thank you.
I would guess that the Town Council Association may have looked at this, Mark, too, so that I don't think they would be letting any of the towns fall into a situation where they would get court judgments against them, obligating them to do certain things.
Then I don't understand the state's hang-up on the word shall.
I don't know that they, excuse me, but I don't know that they actually mandate the language. These policies are developed in response to the state's criteria. And like I said, my recollection is that the Franklin one, which was based on Sudbury, is significantly different in terms of its wording from what Selectman Murphy was reading tonight. So, and I don't know whether that disqualifies Franklin, but that was also being driven by eligibility for grant money.
Well, clearly my concerns are around the specifics and the specific wording of the policy, not the purpose of the policy. I'm on board with
Right.
it.
Okay, great.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Our next appointment
Thank you.
is with the Medfield Planning Board to discuss the planning board's recommended zoning warrant articles for the 2021 annual town meeting. And this is Articles 24, 26, 27, and 28 that we did not vote on the last time. And as with our appointment with the Medfield Energy Committee, we'll discuss this with the planning board and have whatever discussion we're going to have, but we'll take our discussion and actual votes during the portion of the meeting when we're going to run through those remaining warrant articles. So this will just be our appointment with the planning board, and then we will talk amongst ourselves and vote on the warrant articles later. So, welcome to the planning board. Is someone going to speak on all of these, or are these broken up? But whoever's going to, we'll start just go in order, so whoever's going to speak on Article 24, if you could unmute yourself and we'll have at it. And this relates to Article 24, a proposed amendment to address adult-only tobacco stores. So those of you who, hopefully you're getting your warrant report in the mail shortly, this lovely yellow cover. If you want to follow along, you can turn to Article 24. So, Teresa, are you speaking?
Certainly can.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
So we had talked about this briefly at our meeting, whatever that was, 2 weeks ago. And I think we just wanted a little more information on the rationale behind this article, and kind of what's driving it, what it means and all the rest of it, and the potential issues or problems, problem that this is attempting to solve, I guess, would be the question.
Well, our current zoning, doesn't have anything in particular regarding the vape stores. And so to just much like several years ago, we added, we had brought before the town for medical marijuana in certain zoning districts. We wanted to bring forth this town meeting article. This was actually one that was pre-COVID that we had queued up to bring forth at last year's town meeting to prohibit those within our town.
All right, questions? Anyone else? Any other planning board comments before we turn to any questions? Pete, any questions?
No questions at all, Mr. Chairman.
So I do. And Teresa, on this one, I think I understand what the reason for this was. In our discussion 2 weeks ago, I actually brought up the marijuana, where with that one, we specified a zone in a part of the town that probably not too many people would find attractive for that kind of a store. So we met the legal requirement of allowing it in a way that probably wouldn't encourage it too much. The strategy that we have for vape stores seems to be a different strategy, which is rather than allowing for a particular type of store known as a vape store in some part of town that we think would have minimal impact, we're actually requiring that or saying you can't have a vape store unless it's a store that sells multiple products, not just exclusively tobacco and vape products. I think that was the rationale behind the way this article is written. So, okay, I'll take
Right.
that now as yes. So my reaction 2 weeks ago was, oh, great. So I guess what we want to do is encourage Cumberland Farms to start selling vape products. So the sensitivity I have is not around the intent of how this is written, but possibly the unintended consequences of how it's written. And I'm raising that as, is this a concern, or why shouldn't I be worried about that?
Well, I mean, I think that this brings, it's a interesting perspective, Gus. And I think in our discussion, actually, we had a planning board meeting last night and we discussed it further. And, I think with, CVS, North Street Market, that additional layer of protection actually comes also with the Medfield Board of Health.
Okay.
Because to your point, we can't change that or what they could do, but the Medfield Board of Health would be able to have a play in that.
Okay, so let me argue against my negative attitude there and say, what we're really saying is we already let those stores sell cigarettes. If they sold vape products on a par with the way that they sell cigarettes, yeah, it's another potential vice, but it's not really, we've managed to survive cigarettes. We can probably survive vape products delivered through these existing channels that are multiple product convenience stores. That's what we're saying?
I think if I can clarify, the Board of Health does not allow vape products to be sold at Cumberland Farms or CVS or any of those. They can only be sold in stores that are over 21. And currently, the only license we have to sell vape products, I believe, is Larkin's Liquors.
Okay, so this would restrict vape product sales to liquor stores, and I think that's it.
Currently, the Board of Health regulations only allows it in stores that are technically 21 and over. And this would not allow individual stores that only sold that. So this would not preclude Larkin's from losing their license with the Board of Health, but this would not allow a vape only store to open and then sell.
But
if I could jump in, maybe I could clarify some of the confusion. So the Board of Health regulates the use through, their regulations, which cover any establishment with that use inside. With the zoning bylaw, we can only target the use, the umbrella or the primary use of the property. So in the situation like Cumberland Farms or CVS, those are general retail, and we don't regulate what it is they can sell in there. The Board of Health can come in and say, you can't sell X and Y, like, liquor. With Larkin's, it is a liquor store, which
Right.
doesn't mean that they can or can't sell vape materials. But we are saying in town, if the town supports it, we'd rather not have vaping only stores. In terms of the distinction between the marijuana, medical marijuana bylaw that we had previously, I believe, although Mark Sorrell may be able to confirm, by state statute, we were required to allow medical marijuana sales somewhere in town, similar to like an adult use bylaw, but there is no such requirement for vaping stores. So that's why we're approaching it in a different fashion.
all right, I think you've answered my question. I think I understand. At first, I was a little hung up on not understanding how the Board of Health could control things above and beyond this, but I think I now understand that. So, okay, you've answered my questions. I get it. Thank
If I might just add some context, the pre-existing situation, because I was part of the push to get this defined. One of the weaknesses of having a use table type bylaw as we have is what, if you don't have clear definitions as to what goes where, or if you have broad authorizations. And in the case of retail, basically you just have a line that says retail, and it's allowed with simply planning board, I believe, site plan review in 3 districts as of right. So somebody comes in and they're proposing what is a retail use, but there's nothing more specific to define it. There you have it. They go in any of those 3 districts as of right. And so it was a policy issue that was brought before the planning board to address proactively.
Okay. All right. That answers my question.
So I just have a couple of questions. I mean, is the main purpose of this article, this amendment, to discourage vaping and express our disagreement with or desire that people do less vaping? Is that the basic point? We don't like it and so we don't want it in town?
This is Sarah. I was going to say, I think that was our view coming out of the Board of Health's decision to, not allow these uses across town. Obviously, if the town wants to take a different direction, the planning board can respond to that.
Right, but I mean, you are in favor of this article and you want the town to pass it.
Correct.
Right. And so, because there's could be kind of 2 justifications for this type of regulation. One is, we don't like vaping and we don't want to have it in town, and if it's not in town, fewer people will buy vape products, and therefore this will, discourage vaping. The other reason would be, we have no position one way or the other on vaping, but stores like this create regulatory problems, they create ancillary negative consequences that we'd prefer to avoid. In other words, there are certain, you could think of, in some cases, for example, in some of the cannabis places, I mean, one of the challenges for municipalities, a lot of them that sell edibles and things like that, requires a lot of food regulation, right? It requires a lot of oversight of that some places don't have. So you could imagine someone who didn't have a problem with it in theory saying, well, we just don't have the bureaucracy to deal with it. It sounds like here, I mean, there's no studies that suggest that other than vaping, that vape stores produce some negative externalities or regulatory challenges.
I would suggest that there is a problem amongst the children in town using vape products, and it's not especially good for children to be vaping because it's nicotine. They also use it for vaping marijuana, and that I think those are things that the town should try to discourage. The figures from the Metro West Adolescent Health Survey were pretty high in terms of the vaping going on at the middle school and the high school.
Yeah, no, I get it.
And so I think that modeling, it helps if we don't have the vape shop in town.
Yeah, no, but obviously this is an over 21. They're banning an adult. This is banning it for adults.
Right, but just not having the store
Right.
in town,
No,
I think is
then that's
useful.
rationale number one. We're doing this because we don't like vaping and we want to discourage vaping. That's.
I think the way you get,
This, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, sorry, Mike. I think the way we get there most clearly to the primary point is, as Mark said, we can't regulate the sale of vape materials in a general retail store. That's not within the planning board's capability by the way the zoning is structured now, but we can discourage it by not allowing stores that only sell vaping materials. So we feel like that's as far as we can go within the confines of the structure as it's set up now, recognizing that people can get vaping materials in town through general retail stores.
Right.
And
No, I
correct me if I'm wrong, but this isn't just limited to vaping, it's also tobacco products. So a cigar store, for instance.
Right, I think it would bar like a cigar bar or a cigar, or a hookah bar of some kind. I think that would be, as I read it, I think that would be covered, right? Do you agree with that, Sarah?
Trying to pull up the language in front of me, but that sounds right.
Correct.
No, that's correct. Yeah.
All right.
That answers my question.
All right, with no more questions on that, we'll move on to Article 26, which is, well, it's long, but as stated in the warrant, we had some discussion with this the last time, but the description is, the purpose of this proposed bylaw amendment is to add a section which would allow the Board of Appeals to review and approve on a case-by-case basis via public hearing the encroachment of covered or uncovered decks, porches, et cetera, into the required front or rear setback via special permit. Someone want to add a little bit to that, Teresa? At all?
Sure. So this would, and and Sarah Raposa jump in and help too. It allows us to have a special permitting process rather than a variance process that would have had to been in place sometimes with the ZBA for the front and rear setbacks, not the sides, as we looked at this. So, because the current process requires a variance and that has really strict statutory requirements. And so in looking at this, we felt that this would, be able to offer a little bit more flexibility through a special permit process with the planning board, basically.
Pete,
I'll just add to Teresa two more ancillary, maybe less significant, but also worth noting ideas. One is that if you're a non-conforming use now, you can get a special permit to further extend your non-conformity from under Section 6 of the Mass General Laws, Chapter 40A. So for people who already have a nonconformity, they're at an advantage to people who don't, who have to seek a variance at this high standard. So we sort of view this as leveling the playing field for people whose properties are conforming, as opposed to people who are non-conforming. And the last was to try to encourage people to upgrade their properties with things like front porches that would add architectural and visual interest on a street. as opposed to, requiring them to be stuck with this existing lot line. And it's a pretty minimal encroachment. I think 6 feet was the cap.
I would just comment, Mr. Chairman, that I think it's a good idea, gives some flexibility, and lets it get enforced on a case-by-case basis.
And I would just ask if anyone has questions for the planning board as we go through this part of the appointment process, just to get those questions in now. And put them in the Q&A, please, with your name. And if you want to be promoted, or if you just have a question, just put the question in there. If you could do that. Gus, questions?
Just one question, and Sarah, I think you just helped me out a little bit with there's a limit of a 6-foot encroachment on this. So somebody, you'll understand why I'm asking the question. When I get to my question, you'll understand why I'm asking this question. So somebody couldn't just decide that they would like to put a really huge porch on the setback area. However, could go as far as they could make it. It'd be limited to 6 feet.
Right. We chose that. Some of the architects on the board felt like that was adequate depth to make a usable deck without extending inappropriately into the setback.
So my real questions had to do with whether this kind of a provision could enable a homeowner to add first a porch or a deck or something like that onto a house, and then either that homeowner or a subsequent homeowner could decide that they want to completely rebuild their house and use the footprint of the existing house. So suddenly you have a house in an encroaching porch, which suddenly becomes the defining footprint of a house. The reason I ask the question is our family owned a house down in Duxbury at one point down near the beach. And the rules, the house got rebuilt. It was originally a little cottage with a wraparound porch. And then when they rebuilt it into a 5-bedroom beach, across the street from the beach, they had to keep it within the footprint of the entire house. But that meant they could expand the house out to include the porch. So only because I happen to have had that personal experience, that question came up for me here.
Rather have Attorney Sorrell, yeah.
If I could interject several points. Number one, this is by special permit, so it would be permissible to impose conditions on the construction, if it's proposed construction. The other point to raise is that sometimes people innocently buy into these situations, and a prior developer or an owner added these features without the extra care of measuring or getting a surveyor in to determine setbacks and lot lines and all. So you've got rather minimal encroachment, but nevertheless, it's encroaching. So now somebody has the choice of getting zoning relief from a variance or being required to remove the encroachment, which can be fairly dramatic kind of remedy. So it again provides flexibility.
I'll just add to what Attorney Sorrell said too. We did include in the last line of the article a statement that the conditions could include one that the encroachment could never be fully enclosed. So that to that point, you could condition the decision that area never became full living space.
Thanks, sir.
So my only question on this was just with the change in this 6-foot change. Is the status quo that a variance is allowable only up to the 40 and the 50 in the RT, and then by special permit it will now be allowable to 34 and 44?
Currently, you can only go to the 40 and the 50 by right. If you wanted to go further toward the lot line than that, decreasing the amount of setback, you could get a variance, but you would have to show the statutory requirements, including hardship, and then that would not be limited. So theoretically, you could drop from 40 to 0 if a variance were obtainable for that. What we're saying is by special permit, you can go from 40 to 6 feet closer.
I got it.
That's-
So it provides some flexibility, but also some limitation.
There are, right. It's not as unlimited as a variance, although a variance is very hard to obtain and unlikely to be granted to that extent.
Okay, I got it. Any other, Peter, Gus?
Nope.
All right, the next one is Article 27, which is described as the purpose of this amendment is to align with the provisions of the Massachusetts State Building Code, which do not require a building permit for accessory structures, sheds or barns under 200 square feet, and delete the confusing specific size requirement. The amendment would require a building permit and a code review for accessory structures, but leave the setback requirements as is. Pete, any questions?
I did not have any.
Gus?
Nope, no question.
I didn't have any either. In the absence of questions, any comment, Teresa, or should we move on to the next one?
No, I think this one's pretty
I
self-explanatory.
think we
so-
just deferred once we deferred the first one, we
okay.
deferred the block.
For them all.
All right, and finally is Article 28 is the request for the solar voltaic facilities overlay district.
Correct, yeah. So this was the new article that we spent a lot of time working with a consultant to help review the large scale photovoltaic zoning law that we had in place. And this was kind of I'm going to say it was pretty much a full rewrite for the article. And we really looked at all the different types from the roof mounted and the ground mounted, looking at solar parking canopies to create really this photovoltaic overlay district for the town. So to encourage solar as well as, provide some other provisions around it. So let me just open it up to questions.
Pete, any questions?
I do have questions on this one. The residential areas, it looked to me as though you can have the ground mounted, so people can be putting the ground mounted solar in their backyard as long as it complies with the setbacks. Is that the way this is drafted?
Yes, small scale, ground mounted. I will say one of the things that was for roof mounted that for residential, we also kind of made that as a by right.
Yeah, and that was as long as it's within 5 feet of the existing roof. I think it can't stick up more than 5 feet.
Correct, yeah,
Okay,
yeah. It had some limitations around it.
so we're going to allow these freestanding solar structures in people's backyards, basically, but not canopies over their driveways, apparently, is the way I'm reading this.
Correct. I mean, it would have to be it's a very small scale ground mounted that would be allowed.
How large would that be? Is it like 10 kilowatts? I don't know how many panels that is. Is that like 10 by 20, or what does that look like?
No, I mean, it was a much smaller. I'm trying
It's
to
up to
bring up-
10 kilowatts.
up to 10.
Yeah, I just don't know what a 10 kilowatt thing looks like. I guess I can Google that.
That was one of the items we, I don't want to say struggled with, but contemplate just because of technology and technology constantly changing. The size of the panels either start to produce more or they become smaller to get that 10 kilowatt.
I wasn't clear, Paul, whether you knew how large a 10 kilowatt system would be in terms of
Kind of
measurements now?
almost a moving target. Well,
Oh, it's, okay. That's my only question. Thank you.
Gus?
I have one question that applies both to ground mounted and solar parking. The question I had was how this provision interacts with the permeability requirements for a lot. And I was thinking of, I believe Medfield Meadows, for example, when they put their driveways in I think they were required to use permeable construction on those driveways. So on one hand, we're requiring permeable materials in driveways. On the other hand, we're potentially opening up provisions where people can put impermeable canopies over permeable surfaces. And I'm trying to understand the interaction between those permeability requirements that normally apply to lots versus the impermeability of something like a canopy or potentially, I guess, even a ground-mounted array. Does that?
I guess, Gus, I could comment on that. As a civil engineer licensed in Massachusetts, I think they'd still be looking at lot coverage. So, a ground-mounted surface would be similar to a roof structure, right? So if you're looking at how they calculate stormwater runoff, it would be really based on the overall lot coverage, and that would be impermeable at the time of the calculation. So, you can't offset one with the other because it's covered at the end of the day.
I'm not following your answer. So when I put solar arrays on the roof, it's already on an impermeable part of the lot.
You're covering it. So when you cover the impermeable surface, it's no longer or the permeable pavement, it's no more permeable. It's impermeable at that point. Like when you submit an application, if I came before the town, the planning board, or whoever, Conservation Commission, and we were proposing a development, and we had roof and we had canopies, they would be considered what they are, roofs and canopies, at the time of the calculation. You can't all of a sudden come back in and retrofit and all of a sudden lose that from that standpoint. I think there would be consideration from that standpoint.
I might add that you're putting the canopies over parking lots, which are already impermeable surface.
I'm saying that's not necessarily the case, Mark. That I think in the case of Medfield Meadows as an example, when they made that proposal, because of the density of housing that's on it, I think part of the provision of that project is that I could be wrong, but I think the driveways are actually made out of permeable material because they couldn't meet the permeability requirements because of the density of the housing on the lot. They actually had to make the driveways permeable in order to have enough of the lot be permeable. Now, maybe the answer is, well, Medfield Meadows could never propose to put canopies over their parking lot. I don't know. I'm just asking the question how
Well, let me just indicate, and I don't want to disagree with a civil engineer, but we've had a number of solar projects of different sizes in Franklin, and they were treated as permeable, whatever the underlying ground was, because they were sloped, and whatever it was just displaced and ended up back underneath or in the general vicinity of what was the natural surface to begin with. So it didn't have a real effect in terms of the flows, the drainage flows and all, was what was represented to us, or has been represented on a number of occasions.
Mark, I think how you categorize that in the fact that you're sloping it to recapture it from that standpoint. I follow your logic from that standpoint. My comment initially was around newer developments, but understanding where Gus was coming from and applying that to existing developments that had permeable pavement. I understand where his concern can be, but in the way in which you phrased it, I would agree with what you're saying. The idea that it's going to be caught, trapped, and treated from that standpoint, and it's not creating any adverse effect from that standpoint.
Yeah, because I had raised the issue myself on these projects. So somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but there were two major drivers to this bylaw. Number one, the building commissioner had determined under the existing bylaw that the proposed canopies at the Kingsbury Club were not ground-mounted facilities, and therefore he was restricting the ability to go ahead with that project. And then number two, the area was unduly restricted in terms of the town's options to open up areas such as the landfill for the development of solar facilities. So those were, as I understood it, major drivers of this rewrite.
I agree. And I would just, to go back to the kind of primary purpose of the district is as an overlay to allow, this bylaw would only regulate the solar. The property itself is still subject to the underlying zoning, which has restrictions on things like permeability. So you couldn't come in and propose a solar canopy that made you no longer comply with the underlying zoning or your underlying approval. So the solar array has, can have different setbacks than the underlying zoning would have, but it wouldn't be a way to get around the permeability requirements of your underlying zone, including if you were in the aquifer district, which has more enhanced permeability requirements.
Okay, that answers my question. Great.
So my only question is about the provision for municipal solar energy systems, which provides that they're allowed by right on municipal land anywhere. But then it does say that if they're ground mounted, it requires site plan review. And what does that mean? What's the scope of that review? And I ask this because one of the other articles we have in the warrant this year is authorization to go ahead with a solar array on the old town dump. And so I'm just curious what the nature of what any restrictions in review we're placing on the town's ability to do that.
I can wade in on that one. Just the nature of a site plan review just allows for a public hearing. And so there are no restrictions placed on the town other than having it open for public debate and input. We've discussed whether or not to have it by right, but added the special permit to allow for that level of discussion with abutters and folks who might have concerns.
So it's
I'll just add to Seth's point that site plan approval is a review of the layout of the lot, but is not discretionary approval that can be denied. So it's a discussion about how the layout impacts access to the property, making sure there's adequate circulation, visibility around corners in terms of their placement, but ultimately not something that we would be able to deny.
And an opportunity to have peer review, perhaps of drainage.
Understood. All right. I didn't see it. No questions in the Q&A and for the planning board, unless there's anything further from Gus or Pete.
Google tells me that the average solar panel is 250 watts, and so it sounds like you could do 40 of them,
40 of them.
which is pretty big.
And that is in the residential one, the small scale?
That's the
ground mounted?
residential, yep.
All right. Well, we don't want to argue with Google. Anything further based on the Googling, Pete?
No.
Good to go? All right. So thank you very much to the planning board and to Sarah, and appreciate your time. And next, our next appointment is with our Jean Minio docket. So I know Jean has some other people with her as well. And so, Christine, if we can get the crew promoted, and we will run through Minio requests.
I love that Gene found underutilized properties grant program.
Hi, everybody.
Jean?
So that is the first item on the agenda is for the Cultural Alliance with this grant application we'd like to submit. It would be for specifically repairing the roof and asbestos abatement within the chapel only. We expect that could be a $500,000 or $600,000 project. We would be applying for full funding for it. And part of the grant application process requires or asks for a letter of support from the town.
All right, Pete, any questions?
No, I guess not. No, I think it sounds like a good idea.
I shouldn't even have to ask Gus. Would you like to ask your questions?
Actually, I obviously was overachieving this week, but I had Mo was the one who got the primary stuff. I only have some edits to the letter that you submitted.
That's fine.
Wait, are they color coded?
Yeah.
There we
Yes,
go.
they are color coded. Yes, they are. It's harder with PDFs. You can highlight things, but you can't do track changes like you can in Word, so I had to write this stuff down. Just so you know, these are strictly editorial. It's fourth paragraph. MSH sits on 120 acres, that paragraph. It says, and has not produced revenue for the town in more than a century. I would say has not produced regular revenue. I mean, we've made money off of it, so this is all in the interest of accuracy.
Yep.
The next sentence, the reuse plan calls for the redevelopment about 650,000 square feet And I would say potentially including 300 housing units, a new nursing and memory care facility, and commercial space, even because we don't know that that's what a developer will come in with. And then 2 paragraphs down, while we consider the important economic gains in the master plan, the cultural development is also key to preserving, you said the authenticity of MSH, which makes it sound like we're going to turn it back into a state hospital. So I basically said key to preserving the historic connection between the town and MSH. But it's all just wordsmithing.
That's
So,
fine.
okay.
That's fine.
That's it.
What if you said historic character of MSH?
So key to preserving the historic. I'm not sure. I don't know if that makes sense to me, only in that the cultural center is preserving the historic character of MSH. It's preserving the building for sure.
Right. Well, it just seemed like it would then, your edit kind of makes that, I mean, I don't know why we're spending time wordsmithing this letter further, but kind of makes it, it's repetitive of reinforcing the public nature of the MSH campus. I mean, I don't know what the difference between the connection, the historic connection between the town and MSH and the public nature of the
Yeah,
MSH.
what I was specifically referring to was that when the state hospital was in operation, the chapel was the center of a place where many members of the town came for events that actually residents of the state hospital also attended. Now we're basically restoring the chapel as this place that residents of town come back to the state hospital. So
Got it.
that's why I used the words I used.
No,
But
that makes sense. That makes sense. Okay. Pete, anything else?
Nope.
All right. And will all 3 of us sign this? Or what's the
It'll-
timing, Gene? The sooner you need it, the fewer signatures we should put on it.
Tomorrow, no. It's the grant, we're gonna try to submit by June 1st.
Okay. And how much are you going to ask for?
I'll know by the end of the week when we get the asbestos report back. We're doing an update to the 1998 survey, but I'm expecting it to be in the $500,000 to $600,000 range.
Excellent. Well, I think by June 1st is enough time for all 3 of us to sign.
yeah, I
it,
was going to
so-
say, if we have till June 1st, you probably have a better letter if all 3 of us sign it, I would think.
Okay.
All right. So let's have a motion.
Okay, I move that the Board of Selectmen grant the request to sign a letter of support to the Cultural Alliance of Medfield's application to the Mass Development Underutilized Properties Grant Program.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Murby, yes.
All right. 1 down. Next up, Cultural Alliance of Medfield programming at the Medfield State Hospital on land leased to the Cultural Alliance of Medfield.
So I actually asked Jean if I could put this on the agenda and talk with you about it. Where we have leased the property to the Cultural Alliance, the question came up whether or not they need to come to the Board of Selectmen for permission for activities that they are planning at the chapel. So we're just looking for clarification to make sure we're all on the same page regarding that. Obviously, Jean and I talk about the dates to make sure there's no other large events and coordinate that, but specifically whether or not they need permission to hold events at the chapel property.
Pete, questions?
No. I mean, I guess my opinion would be that they don't.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The only caveat I'd put to that is because the chapel property is on the MSH property, and if they hold events, people will be coming to the property. I don't think the town would be telling CAM what they can and can't do, but there should be some sort of coordination to make sure that the hospital property itself can be made available to support whatever they have planned. So to that extent, I think at this point, while we're still in an undeveloped state, it would make sense that we would ask CAM to, basically get our agreement for them to be able to access the property using the town property to get there, or parking on the town property. Is there, Christine, is there anything that you can think of that any diabolical plans that you can imagine Cam might have in mind that would be so egregiously offensive to the town sensibilities that we should put a tighter
No,
rope on
to be honest,
Gene?
I was advocating for Cam and for Jean to be able to not have to come and remember to book events through the Board of Selectmen where it's their property and they've leased it from us. Other than it's good PR, we can put it on as informational. But Jean is always good about coordinating with me to make sure, what's going on for the date. So I think I was just asking for more permission to do it internally with Jean rather than have to do a formal vote from the Board of Selectmen, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think
absolutely.
I think that's fine. No, I don't think it's the intent of the lease that we're kind of overseeing the activities. We're not overseeing the activities of the Cultural Alliance of Medfield. I guess the only time it would be an issue is if there was some conflict and Gene was expecting 1,000 cars up there, and there was something else happening that we had to sort out. But otherwise, I think it's a logistical issue that, I mean, are you looking for a vote, Christine, from us on this that?
No, I think just authorization, that Jean and I will coordinate. And obviously we work with John Thompson to make sure, there are no other activities that would, impede.
No,
access to the site.
I don't think we need to have particular events on the,
Okay.
on the agenda unless there's a request for funding or something else. But just in terms of permission, I don't think our lease requires us to do that either, so.
I didn't think so. Which may
All
make
right.
letter C null and void because Jean was seeking permission for installation of temporary or seasonal staging, but it's on Cam leased property. So I think you're okay with that then.
All right. And then the last one is request for installation of a bench at the MSH Chapel property.
Yep, and we have 2 high school students with us tonight too, Sophia Slesser and Ava Blake, who've been working on this project. I think actually the same guidelines would apply to this. We're interested in locating benches on the chapel property, on the leased property on the green. And excuse me, this is part of a project called Reaching into Medfield, which is a partnership between the Cultural Alliance, Medfield Cares About Prevention, and Medfield Outreach. And there's probably about a dozen high school kids working on this project together. It includes some poetry, storytelling. Ultimately, we think there'll be a video, there'll be mosaics, and the benches would be part of this. And John Thompson, when I spoke to him about it, he has in storage on the property now 10 or 12 benches that were on the property at one time, probably about the 1970s. And they range from 4 feet wide to 6 feet wide. And he would be interested in us reusing those benches. And I think there's interest among this group and this team to do that as well. So again, it would be on the chapel property, but where it's hospital property, town-owned property in terms of the benches themselves, I think that's probably what we're looking for permission to be able to reuse those. And Ava and Sophia, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add or questions you might have. Okay.
So is there an action that we should take, or is it,
I
is
do
Mark
have-
going to tell us that there's some bureaucracy around the benches that we have to go through, or?
I can mute
I do
him.
have one question on the benches, which is, are these, I guess if John has them stored and you can take them, these are benches, I don't know whether these are stone benches or what they are, but this is not a permanent installation that these benches will never again move?
Well, they could be moved, I suppose. I'm not sure how we would actually install them now, because the layout actually hasn't been finalized, but they're delicate's not the right word, but they're wood, excuse me, 2 wood slats on the back, 3 on the seat. And some of the wood boards need to be replaced, but otherwise they're in decent condition. They've been painted different colors already. They're going to need a new coat of paint.
So let me tell you, my concern is because we do not yet know how we're developing the rest of the campus, something that might make sense right now, which would be just fine, might not actually mesh very well with whatever the rest of the development of the rest of the campus turns out to be. So my concern isn't about using, I actually think it's a great idea to use the hospital benches. That sounds like a great thing to do. I like the reason, the reasoning behind what you're trying to get done. The only thing I'm doing is I'm looking out a year or two, assuming that the RFP for redevelopment is successful, and then having a developer come in and do lots of stuff all around the property, and without knowing what it is they're doing with all the stuff that's all around it, I don't know how you would know where to place them in the permanently optimal place where the chapel property meshes seamlessly with the rest. So that's my concern, is when this development occurs, the rest of the campus is going to look different. It probably would make sense to do something now that might be pretty sturdy, but nonetheless could be adapted down the road. That's all.
So do we need any formal or official action on this, or
I don't.
did our decision on 5B obviate the need for a vote on 5D?
It did. I should have put C and D, maybe optional.
Optional. Okay.
And let me make sure that's true.
My suggestion would be to simply give the CAM the permission to use the benches for the time being. They don't sound like they're that heavy duty that you're gonna install them, and they're gonna be there for 5 or 10 years anyway.
That would be that's the one thing it seems like maybe we have to do, is officially say this is town property. You can have it to use. And I'm not sure we're giving the benches to you, but you can have these benches for your use for the,
Right.
For the foreseeable future. I'm not sure which of us would decide that those benches should no longer be there. You may not want them before we want to take them back, for all I know.
Well, I mean, if like Antiques Roadshow comes in and one of them's worth like 10 million,
Yeah.
then we may want to be able to get it back.
George Washington sat here.
Right.
We'll want that one back.
Right, there's some diamond stashed in the bench or something, then we'll want to be sure to get it back. So otherwise, all right, so why don't we have a motion to authorize it's not really a lease, to loan for an indefinite period, some number of these 10 to 12 undetermined benches of undetermined size and weight as identified by John Thompson. All right, Mr. Clerk.
So moved. I learned that. So moved.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
And Mr. Murphy, yes.
All right. Well, thank you to Jean, Sophia, and Ava. Thank you very much for coming.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, next item is vote to authorize me to sign the MSBA First Amendment to Feasibility Study Agreement. We approved this at the School Building Committee meeting the other day. And Christine, just remind me, is this extending the time, or which was this one?
Yes, and this actually goes back to July 2019. They were working through all the paperwork. They just got it back to us. We originally signed this about a few months ago. Pete actually signed it, and then MSBA sent it back to us and asking that the school building committee sign it, as well as the chair of the Board of Selectmen. So we decided to have it re-signed by the selectmen. And then, as you said, the school building committee just voted last week to sign it as well.
All right, do we have a motion, Gus?
I move that we authorize the chair to sign the MSBA First Amendment to the Feasibility Study Agreement.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
And Ms. Murphy, yes.
All right, next item, COVID-19 status update.
Let's see, I have a couple of things for you. Actually, this ties in with my discussion of federal funds update. We've been discussing with the Norfolk County Town Administrators. There's been a discussion that we're being asked to sign on to a letter requesting that Norfolk County turn over the ARP funding to us when it is officially released to them. There's a presentation that's been making its way around to boards of selectmen, but we've been asked to hold on that for a few weeks. There's several Norfolk Town administrators who are on the county board, and they've asked us to hold on that, but I will be asking you within the next few meetings to ask to sign on to a letter asking for that money to be turned over to us.
Assuming the county doesn't do it on its own in the interim.
Correct. I think that's what we're hoping for right now.
And is there a
Absent
timetable-
of that, we'll have a letter.
Is there a timetable for the county making that decision?
I believe those negotiations are ongoing right now.
Okay. Anything else on that?
Nothing on that, and nothing on our 2022 operating capital budgets. The warrant report has been mailed. You should have received it today. If not, we're hoping you should receive it tomorrow. As Mike commented, it is yellow. Please bring it to town meeting. And we are hoping to finish everything on May 17th on one evening. So we would ask that you visit our 2021 annual town meeting website and get all of the background material, and any questions that you may have, we can try and answer for you before we get to town meeting, so that we can try and finish it in one night, since we're still outside as well.
I have to say, at a baseball game at McCarthy Park last night around 6 o'clock, I was thinking it was probably a good thing we were not having town meeting outside at that moment. It was pretty cold at 6 o'clock last night. So hopefully it'll be better on May 17th, although Westwood did manage to conduct their town meeting outside yesterday. So anything else on the town meeting?
Nothing.
Oh, and just one question on that, Christine. We were able to get a video board, is that right, for the town meeting?
Correct. We have a video board. We are doing our walkthrough on Thursday morning, since we got rained out tomorrow. We'll do our walkthrough on Thursday, and once we finalize that, we will let everybody know who's doing a presentation, what the availability of that is.
All right.
Should we put the official votes up on the high school scoreboard or anything?
We're working on it.
So one thing we should talk about, because this comes up later, but we should address it at this point in the meeting as well, just from a planning standpoint. Christine, do we have anything on our docket for next week right now, for May 11th?
We do not.
All right, so there's a chance we won't meet next Tuesday. So in terms of our town meeting preparation, we should go through and figure out if one of us is going to speak on any of the warrant articles, which one of us. I mean, obviously, we're each free to speak as called upon by the moderator, but to the extent there are any questions to the board or requests for comment from the board, we don't comment on every article, obviously. We should probably figure out who's going to do what on which of the articles. So I'm just springing this on you now, and we can go through them after we go through the remaining articles that we haven't voted on yet. But I think we should just get a plan from that standpoint so that we know that we're prepared. And obviously, we can each speak to any of the articles as well, but just in case that we're coordinated. Normally, we do that next week, but I guess we're going to be optimistic and think maybe we won't meet next week. Optimistic on behalf of Christine. I'd be thrilled to have a meeting next week. I'd love to give Christine and Nick the night off. All right, let's go through the remaining articles. Article 24 we talked about tonight with the, this is the vape shop article from the planning board. Any further discussion? Yeah, so I'll just comment on this, because as you can tell from my questions, I mean, I've got no particular desire or no particular brief for vaping or any of these type of things, and people probably shouldn't do it. I just always ask the question about sort of the purpose to which we have, for why we have regulations, right? And the planning board is principally there to regulate the use of land and property and the rest of it. The Board of Health is there to regulate health issues. And so, and I support this article. I think this is good to do. I think Pete's correct that we're better off not having these in town. And if the state wants to force us to, they can. But I am always skeptical of using kind of regulations that are primarily for one purpose for another purpose, right? And this came up last year or maybe 2 years ago, even, I don't know, at some point in the past, when the Warrant Committee or someone on the Warrant Committee had proposed raising kind of building permit fees as a way of generating additional revenue for the town. And we ultimately didn't do that. And I sort of commented on the time that the purpose of having building permits, the purpose of having building codes is to make sure we build safe buildings and we have permit fees to defray the cost of the regulations necessary to do it. And so I don't like the notion of kind of using fees that are for one purpose to kind of generate general revenue. And I have the same view of regulation, that, you know, if you're going to regulate something for health purposes, you should regulate it for health purposes under health regulations. And if you're going to regulate something for land use, you should regulate it for land use. Now, I also recognize that there's not a clear line between these things, because to Sarah's point, you know, the planning board can regulate sort of the frame. They can regulate what's there, what's in the building, and the use that you're putting it to. But really, this is a health, the motivation behind this is a health motivation, right? To eliminate using the planning and zoning regulations and the planning board to enforce sort of a health limitation. Because it doesn't seem like there's any other negative externalities from these type of stores, other than the negative effects of using the products that they sell. And so, I mean, and we're trying to discourage the use of the products that we sell. And so, again, I support this. I think this is on the right side of the line. But I'm just, I think it's worth a pause when we're going to use one type of regulation to achieve a purpose that is somewhat tangential to the primary purpose of that regulatory regime. So that's just an editorial comment.
Mike, I'm not sure if, maybe this is health too, but you brought up the two reasons why we might do it. And the second one was the idea that we don't want certain kinds of establishments in town. And for me, that's not exactly health in the sense that we don't want you to vape. It's community health, maybe, in terms of what is it that, because of the nature of our town and the number of young people that live in this town, this is, I think, a bigger issue for us than it might be for some other town that's more typical. Certainly, some of our sensitivities here, if we were even in maybe a place like Waltham, we would say, what's wrong with a hookah bar? You know, let's put it in there. To me, if it's health, it's community health, and it's got to do with not wanting little kids going to school seeing a vape shop as one of our prime stores. And it's not so much, I mean, you can make an argument, I guess, for people who smoke too much, that vaping is a healthier alternative, even if it's not a good alternative. So you could even make health arguments for vaping. And I'm sensitive to the idea that as a society, you accept certain vices. So we accept alcohol, we accept tobacco. Vaping is not drastically different than tobacco in terms of just kind of the magnitude, and yet we're against that. It's something new. I don't think we're better off with yet another option for vices here in town. But for me, it's actually not purely the health thing. Let's make it hard for you to find vape equipment, because I don't think it's that hard to find it. It's actually a community health thing that says, I don't think that's the picture that we want our kids to see anywhere in town. It's any more than we probably don't want a tattoo parlor in town. So to that extent, I actually see it as a land use issue more than health. But.
Well, and that's why I think it falls on the right side of the line for me. I think you've articulated that well. That I think that's, but I just raise it as I just raise it as a general concern, and why I had more questions about this one than some others. It's more of a philosophical thing, but I think you've articulated well why I think it falls on the right side of the line. So, do we have a motion, Gus?
I move the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 24 to amend the table of use regulations regarding adult-only tobacco stores. Is that what it's actually called?
I'll second that.
Adult-only retail tobacco and/or vape stores.
And/or vape stores, yeah. It's just the way it was in the summary sheet.
Yeah.
Mr. Marcucci?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
And Mr. Werby, aye.
All right. Article 26, which is the setback special, switching from a variance to a special permit. Any discussion? No, we have a motion.
I move that the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 26, the table of use regulations regarding, it says height and bulk, but concerning setbacks for porches, decks, and other appendages to houses.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
And Mr. Murphy, yes.
And Article 28, the photovoltaic array.
Do we have to do 27 too?
I think we are, oh, do we
I
have to
think I didn't have 27 marked down last
27?
time.
So let's do 27 next, which is the shed one.
Yeah. Yeah. I recommend the Board of Selectmen approve Article 27, the table of use regulations regarding height and bulk for sheds.
Second,
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
yes.
Mr. Murphy, yes.
28 is the, now this is the solar
Solar, yep.
photovoltaic
Yep.
facilities overlay district, or PVOD.
Yes.
All right, any further discussion?
No.
No.
I move that the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 28, the solar photovoltaic facilities overlay district.
Second,
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
yes.
Mr. Murphy, aye.
Article 29 now is the citizen petition on the Dale Street School. Any discussion on this? Pete?
I guess I don't support this one, so
Yeah.
no discussion beyond not supporting it.
It's one of our decisions that's being asked to be advised against here, so, but I just don't know if there's any further comment. or discussion.
I'll make a comment on this. First off, I'm in agreement with you, Pete. I recognize the voices that had concerns about how this whole process unfolded, and they're doing their best to make their voices heard even now. As a selectman, I'm not sure, I suspect this is similar to how the two of you may think about this. We appoint committees to do jobs, and when we do it right, we pick people who are qualified, who have experience in the area that they're working on a committee. When that committee comes in with a set of recommendations, in the absence of any clear mishandling of process, something that shows a corrupt process coming to a recommendation, as a selectman, I personally think in almost all circumstances, it's important to support the recommendations of that committee that we appointed. Otherwise, when I look at it, it's like you appoint a committee, but you have a hip pocket answer, and if the committee comes in with your hip pocket answer, then you'll like it, and if you don't like the answer and you don't support them. So I recognize the debate. Some people I have a lot of respect for here in town had a different view of where the school needed to go, and in particular, I'm thinking of one retired teacher who I have a lot of respect for that expressed an opinion early on that I ignored. So I don't recommend approval of this article, but I wanted to be clear why. I think it's important for selectmen to back committees who come in with legitimate recommendations.
Could I just take a moment?
Yeah, sure.
As well? I agree with your initial point, Gus, that we should pay attention to the committees that we appoint. In addition, for me, the essential report back from that committee was that the majority of the members of that, many of whom build schools for a living, said that if we built it at the Dale Street site, that we would end up with a compromised school building. And I'm not wanting to spend $70, $80 million and end up with a compromised school for the town. So for me, that was a deal breaker for the Dale Street site, getting that opinion from that many people on that school building committee.
So, yeah, I agree with both of you on the substance of the article, and I think part of it is, there is a process, and I agree with you to a point, Gus, that I don't think we should be substituting our judgment for recommendations from committees. At the same time, when we're being asked to make a judgment, and obviously I'm on the other committee, so it's not, and so I made a substantive judgment based on my own analysis of the evidence. We do have to make a substantive judgment, and I think you both did. I don't think either of you just deferred to any other committee to make a decision. For me, obviously, this is an issue that's been the subject of great discussion and debate. And for me, procedurally, at this point, there's going to be a vote at a special town meeting and a vote of the whole populace of the town. And so, and I think there is, even though I disagree with it, I think you can legitimately just decide that you prefer the one location so much that the other advantages, they outweigh the advantages of the Wheelock site. Right? You can make a value judgment that says, look, we recognize all the facts about one location versus the other, but the only thing that really matters to us about the school is the site. And that whatever the other advantages are, we're going to choose as a town this site over the other. And I think that's a legislative judgment and a judgment of the polls that the people of the town can make. And I think if they value that location over everything else more than everybody else, so be it. That's why we have a process, right? The town meeting is not a rubber stamp process. The vote is not a rubber stamp process. I don't think it's healthy to try to pretend away all the advantages of the alternative. There's kind of, there's a tendency in argument, and I mean, this came up on another issue in the school building committee. When you feel very passionately about one side of an issue, is you see everything in one direction. And so you can kind of make an argument and make an analysis that sounds like no person of good faith could have the alternative view, right? And so it's like, well, in column A, if you do A, you'll get hit in the head with an axe. And B, you won't get hit in the head with the axe. Which do you think is better, right? I mean, at some point, I think you've got to recognize the nature of the decision that you're making and the rest, and there will be that opportunity to do it. So I would say, I'm opposed to this substantively because I persuaded that the evidence isn't very strongly on the side of the Wheelock location. But I'm also, from a procedural standpoint, this is a very unusual town meeting. It's going to be outside at 5 o'clock on a Monday. I don't know how representative it's going to be. We're still here, in this sort of pandemic period. And if we thought we were going to be in this period for another 3 years, you just have to go with it. But otherwise, we're going to have a special town meeting in the ordinary course, in September or October, where the town will get to vote up or down on the complete full version of the recommended project. And then so be it. So I think even if you're in favor ultimately of the Dale location, I think this is not the time to express that. This is just an advisory vote, so it has whatever weight of advice that it has. It doesn't bind anybody, and so I don't favor it at all. We have a request from Jerry Potts to speak on this, and I didn't get any requests in advance on this. Given how contested this is, I would normally put it on with everybody else the way the Energy Committee was on and give both sides an opportunity to speak. Jerry just said it's going to be quick. I've known Jerry for a long time. I'm not going to hold him to that. But I will let you speak on this, Jerry, and I would ask you to keep it quick and to a point, because again, I didn't put on the agenda that there'd be people speaking on this and didn't invite kind of the other side to speak as well. But I will give you this one point that has not been brought up before, which I would find shocking given the number of points that have been brought up on this issue over the course of the last year. But go ahead, Jerry.
Hi, folks. So I just came from umpiring a game in Millis. So I apologize. This is not how I look when I'm ready to speak for. So the one point is, and I've heard this a couple of times and I've not had a chance to address it, which is Gus's and Pete's point that committees are appointed in town, and once these professionals make decisions, your job is to support them. And that hasn't been how committees have operated in this town. The state hospital had a 4-year committee that made recommendations on a master plan that the Board of Selectmen never voted on and were against. The townwide master plan that was just brought up had all kinds of pushback and concerns voiced and criticisms that were made of it. The selectmen have made decisions not to listen to committees before. So it seems to be a little bit selective that one committee, just pretty much we have to listen to them because they're professionals, and others, we kind of take or leave. And that point I find is intellectually inconsistent. I totally agree with whether or not you support the idea of having this, adjudicated by voters before the fall meeting. Our point is it saves money to know that the majority of people are against it as soon as possible. But from a committee standpoint, which is the point I'm trying to make here, the Board of Selectmen have overridden committees quite a bit and have pushed back on committees that they disagreed with. And it's one of the things I respect about you guys is you have an opinion and you disagree and you bring up the points. So I just think it's intellectually inconsistent on that one argument to say that, well, we better listen to them because they're the professionals, where we have, after a 4-year committee with the state hospital, we just disagreed with them and totally ignored what their recommendations were, or significantly ignored, or challenged many of the premise of that committee that worked very hard for 4 years with a lot of important professionals and also a consultant who was very good at what they did. So I just think it's intellectually inconsistent.
I would just respond with two comments, Jerry. One, I think on the State Hospital Committee, we are going forward with a disposition basically based on that committee's suggestions. So I don't think that got ignored. I think the Townwide Master Planning Committee has received some negative comments from this board, but the Townwide Master Planning Committee is still a work in progress and plans on coming back to this board to ask this board to endorse it. So that's still hasn't been ignored by this board yet.
But their historical committee has made recommendations. I'm just saying there are track records of not always agreeing. And again, I think that's healthy. I think that's shows democracy. I think disagreement and good, healthy debate to get the best decision is what you, more than almost any board, has consistently done. And I respect that. You've given me a chance to speak tonight, and there are a lot of committees that wouldn't have done that. So I appreciate the board doing that. I just do think there are some selective, which committees sort of, in this case, this got pushed through in a very quick period of time. So anyway, thank you. I know it's not going to change the vote, but I did want to call that out.
I would also come, I'm not sure whether I could easily envision you having directed some of that at me, because I tend to be feisty about a lot of things, Jerry. So,
I think everyone disagrees sometimes. That's good.
Yeah, I know.
I like it.
Well, my point though was that what I personally try to do when I'm on this board, if I see, and I did it before I got on this board, for that matter, I was attending the State Hospital Master Planning Committee meetings as a non-member for 5 years or something. And I made my opinions known then too. But what I try to do if I'm on this board and I have concerns about where a committee is headed, is I try to flag those concerns really early. If that committee doesn't respond to those concerns, the committee erodes my support. Doesn't necessarily destroy it, but it erodes my support. So what you were seeing, to the extent your comments at all apply to me, what you see as inconsistency, as I look at it, is very consistent. I try hard to let a committee know well in advance what I think, and I'm only one of 3 opinions, so I don't expect all of my opinions to be listened to. But if they're not, and I'm not convinced otherwise, then chances are that committee's going to have a rougher time with me. I would point out, though, in this particular project, it was the opposition that made the case last fall that the proper hearings hadn't been held that caused us not to just rubber stamp the committee's recommendation, but to push for those open hearings. Speaking personally, what happened during that process is I posted the pros and cons of the 2 sites as I understood them, and I put it out at one of these meetings. I did that for a reason, because if you looked at that score sheet, it was very clear that the evidence that I had, or the information I had in front of me, was speaking loudly in favor of the Wheelock site. I hadn't voted yet, but I was basically putting that out there so that everybody could see how this all stacked up. Speaking editorially now, and this is, again, I'm not suggesting my view is qualified. I think you've made a good argument about the temporary the temporary ability to put students in other unused capacity in the schools. So I think that's an argument that's got legs with me. But I think you've ignored the argument that the schools have made around the design of the school at Wheelock that cannot be duplicated at Dale. And I'm not an expert. I'm not trying to be an expert, but me trying to adjudicate the competing decisions.
No, and I respect
that are driving my views right now.
I respect that, but I know there were 2 things that were in particular that both Pete quoted and you quoted. One was 44 acres at Wheelock, and that was submitted by the SBC to the MSBA. And that 44 acres includes 5 soccer fields and the Wheelock current campus. Mm-hmm. It is not 44 acres that's being built on, and that was misleading. It is simply not that. It is closer to 17 acres, which is actually the same size as the campus at Dale. So there are additional bits of information here that are significant, that I think have you were against using a field because they were going to have to build modulars on that field. Well, that doesn't have to happen now. So this was pushed through. The SBC voted it. Okay, now I'm going back on things you've already heard, and I'm not going to change any of your minds on it. But I will tell you that on a process that the SBC voted on this, and then two of the selectmen said at the next meeting before any public hearings were held, you pretty much were ready to vote that night. I don't think all of these things were explored. You as a committee a year earlier, 2 years earlier, talked about community use at Dale Street for Park and Rec. That was never explored as an option for the town to consider. And if we're spending 60 to 70 million on a building, I think it would be a good thing to explore that we have one building MSBA helps pay for that could also, with 175 more student need than we currently have, could also have Park and Rec programming and save the company, save the town money, and not add a whole new building to our inventory when the selectmen have said that that's a concern. So these are the things that we, with more dialogue, I think could have had before a vote was taken. We've learned more as the process has gone on, but I think all of those are legitimate. I don't think anything I'm saying here is misinformation. People can disagree with it. And Mike has brought up this point before. At some point, people just disagree, right? So, at this point in time, if we want to go to a town vote at the end of the year, it's going to be more money. It's going to cost more. We believe an earlier decision to reconsider it will save the town money. But I totally understand nothing I'm saying here is going to change your opinion. So I appreciate you giving me the chance, Mike, to speak, and I will recede back into umpiring gear.
Yeah, no, and I'll just say though, the thing is, this is not a vote to. You're making an advisory vote to reconsider it, right? It's not a reconsideration.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like your group is going to post a bond if it turns out that your proposal is more expensive. You're going to make up the difference, right? So, I think
it's not more expensive, but again, if you want to take the 18 to 20 million for Dale Street, what we're going to do with that, net.
Yeah, but again, Jerry, I don't want to get into it, but that's another thing that you're throwing out there that's just misleading, right?
It's factual.
No, it's not.
Is Dale Street going away? If we build at Wheelock, do we not have a large town building? Did we not add a new building to our inventory? Of course
it's not going away, but we're also not mandated to remodel it for 18 to $20 million.
No, but if Park and Rec, the Permanent Building Committee had a meeting where they recommended that Park and Rec move into it. If they move into it, they're going to have to renovate it up to standards. It's going to cost 18 million. That's what the 2017.
They're going to have to do that, Jerry. Then they're not going to move into it. No one's spending $18 million to renovate Dale Street.
Then why are they voting on that? Because I'm just saying we should have an open dialogue on these things.
What they're voting on is to move into it essentially as is. Because whether you need a new Parks and Rec building doesn't depend on what you do with the school.
The 2017 report said that triggers a reuse.
I let you speak.
Yes,
you're right. It depends on what happens with the FAF Center. So if the roof of the FAF Center falls in next week, we are probably not going to write a huge check to fix it. And then we'll have a question, do we want to have a Parks and Rec building or not? The same thing is true in 3 or 4 years. What I understand the Permanent Planning and Building Committee is looking at is what would essentially be the cost to move into the Dale Street building as is, where if it's not adequate as a school, but it's adequate as a Parks and Rec building, and then you put off the need to build, either build a new Parks and Rec building or have no Parks and Rec building for 6 or 7 years. I don't think anybody has suggested that if we build a new Wheelock school, we are going to commit ourselves to build. I know at least one selectman whose number for a Parks and Rec building is 0. So
right, and I thought the best way to do it is have MSBA help us pay for that building and use that building in the center. But
generally speaking, they only pay for schools and not Parks and Rec.
Sure, they do.
I don't think all of these arguments at town meeting, and I'm sure there will be people there to fact check these arguments as you make them.
I know what I'm saying is factual. They can be disagreed on, but it's factual. So
Well, but you can have a fact that is not relevant. So you can say it would cost $60 million to build a state-of-the-art Parks and Rec building at Dale Street. That may be a fact, okay? If no one is even considering, proposing, or suggesting that we build a $60 million state-of-the-art facility at Dale Street, then that is not relevant to the question. And it's intended to mislead people. Hold on. It's intended to mislead people.
No, it isn't.
That is the cost that we're signing up for.
No, it isn't, Mike. And let me say this, and then I will be done. The 2017 report said if we reuse that for something else, it will trigger code. And our own document in 2017 said a reuse of either office or rec would cost $18 million. That's not my number. That's what we said in 2017. So we can't just move them in there. It doesn't meet code because it would be a reuse. It's not a school. So
we are going to sort that out. And if the answer,
and I agree. I think it's a great discussion to have. I'd like to
we're just going to tear it down. But again, the problem is there was a pretty long process. And I know you think the process was too short, but there was a fairly long process on all of this, right? And it was longer than the normal MSBA process. It was extended to allow additional discussion. And at some point, the question just gets called. And you can spend all the time you want, and we can all spend all the time we want, spinning out any hypothetical and coming up with alternatives, things we could have done, things we should have looked at, things we could have done otherwise. And frankly, I've been guilty of that at times with respect to the hospital, and I have tried to avoid that, right? Because at some point, the question is called, right? You have the question, you have to decide.
So my only point is
the answer is we're going to
vote that was taken by the
Let me finish. If we're going to decide this, we'll decide it. And if it's yes, if it's no, that's what it is. And that's where we are. And all I'm going to ask is that we try to have, because the problem, if you make a decision on the basis of a false premise, you're stuck with the false premise.
And there are many false premises on this today. My point is that there were 150 meetings, you're right, but the final recommendations that actually had cost and proposals on the site was done in one meeting and was voted on by the SBC. And that was the most critical time to have an extended dialogue before votes were taken. And that's all we were trying to ask for, was instead of the SBC voting it and then the selectmen saying, well, the SBC already voted for it, there were no public hearings that allowed us to ask these questions, because I was trying. So the SBC,
I was at them. We heard lots of questions from you, Jerry.
That was after the original agenda that you had. You were ready to take a vote without having public participation on the agenda. We had to petition to have public input put on that vote. That's just fact. So there was one meeting that people got to ask questions. We had seen the documents and the final proposals for less than 48 hours. And I just think that stage needed to have before. What we did with the selectmen after with public hearings was already done. The decisions had already been made. So all we were asking for is before a vote was taken, why not talk to the public? And they didn't with those options. They did it in one meeting and did the vote. So again, we will never agree on this. I understand that. You're on that committee. I know how much work you and others have put into it. We just feel that there wasn't enough voice. But again, it's not going to change your vote tonight. And we look forward to making the case and the town voting.
Well, the town meeting voting on the 17th on the advisory article. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you.
You have
Appreciate it. Thanks for the time.
Yep. We have a vote.
So I assume we're recommending dismissal as opposed to just simply having no recommendation.
Dismissal, right.
Okay. I move that the Board of Selectmen recommend dismissal of Article 29, recommendation for Dale Street School site selection amendment with MSBA.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
And Mr. Murphy, yes.
And I'll volunteer to speak on this one at town meeting if it comes up. So the next one, Article 30, is the request for a committee charged with creating a Medfield town bylaw to govern school building projects that includes a school building committee appointment process led by the town moderator in keeping with Medfield school policy and designed to engage citizens at large. So I will start off by saying I'm not sure what the committee will do since the committee's conclusion is written into the article, but any discussion on this?
I guess I'll start by just saying I'm sort of ambivalent about it. I don't generally care how committees are appointed, if whether it's the select board or the moderator. So I guess what I'm going to do is I'm just going to wait and hear the arguments at the town meeting because I don't have an opinion about this.
So I do have an opinion on this. I'm opposed to this article now. I am not opposed to the article in concept. I've spent a fair amount of time trying to follow the arguments around what was and wasn't followed and done properly and how the town bylaws intersect with MSBA rules and policy. My comment, I think the two of you would agree, is my view of this process in terms of the Board of Selectmen's involvement in appointing people to this committee was largely, as I saw it, a pro forma agreement to follow the requirements that the MSBA had specified in terms of membership on the committee. some of the specific appointments was a matter of taking a recommendation coming from the committee on who they wanted on the committee and going along with it. So from the legal dimension of this not following proper bylaw procedures is something that at the time we were making decisions, I wasn't worried about, because I didn't actually see us having a reason to be exercising direct discretion over specific choices. We were just trying to put a committee together that complied with the MSBA requirements, made up of people that the people on the committee thought would be helpful, that had the right qualifications, and we went with it. So in terms of doing this now in the middle of trying to carry a school project out, I can only see, first off, this probably would be carried out with a somewhat loaded set of interests and perspectives, specifically as they apply to this current project. And number two, it has the potential to simply create confusion around what the process is. Play out the possibility that next fall the funding doesn't get approved. Then we still have a school project, but then we'd have this committee that's kind of changing rules that may or may not apply to chapter 2 of this saga, or maybe they would, or maybe they wouldn't. So I see it as something that is not urgent to be done now if it is not intended to affect this current school project. We will be a decade away from needing to go through this drill again. I don't disagree with the criticism that we apparently didn't have our act together around the bylaws, and we should be deliberate and clear. So if there's a committee that can be formed after this project to make sure our bylaws are straight, they probably won't be referred to for another 8 or 15 years, but if while this experience is fresh in people's mind, it makes sense to have a committee to get that straightened out, I'm all for it. I just think the timing for it is wrong in this cycle.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of comments on this. I mean, first of all, we have a bylaw review committee. So we have a committee that's a standing committee of the town. It is not, it's been more sitting still and hasn't had much to do, but we have a bylaw review committee. And I think the issue I have with this and the timing is that this arose after the committee made a recommendation. And most of the argument, including the submission we got, a week or so ago, is about how the existing committee was appointed. And so clearly it seems that part of the motivation of this is to cast doubt on the legitimacy. I heard somebody refer to it as an illegal committee. It was an illegal committee, right? And I've looked at it. I looked at the bylaws. I looked at this, and this Medfield school policy from a handbook from 20 some odd years ago, it's not a bylaw, it's not a charter provision. And so, and if it's a policy of the school committee and the school committee didn't step forward and say, we want you to follow our policy. And if you look at the policy itself, it references the old regime, right? So there was this change in state regulation or state administration of school building projects. And I don't forget when the MSBA came into place, but they they revamped the whole process and created the MSBA. And so this was the system under the old system. And what the MSBA regulation says is the committee has to be appointed according to the bylaws of the town. And it's got to be approved by the MSBA. And the MSBA has a whole list of people that they want to see in the committee. And I think, as you both know, we had originally proposed just offering up our permanent planning and building committee as the school building committee. And they said, no, you have to have all of these various people on it. And the only bylaw provision to go by is that the default is that committees are appointed by the Board of Selectmen. So the selectmen are given in the charter specific charge to appoint such other officers and boards as are necessary. And so whereas the moderator's appointment powers are specifically spelled out, and it says that he has such appointment powers as spelled out. And I think the only appointment powers that are spelled out of the warrant committee and I think the moderator, Christine can correct me, does the moderator get an appointment on the personnel board?
Correct.
And there's one other one? Might be one other one. But so, I mean, again, so I looked at this from a lawyer's perspective, and if the question had come up, if this had been raised, right, this is the kind of thing as well, and I don't want to go back to the last one, but when we think about the process and how we make decisions, right? I mean, if this committee shouldn't have been appointed the way it was, the time to do that is when the committee's appointed, right? If there was any confusion about how the committee was appointed, that confusion should have arisen at the outset of its appointment. And as you'll recall, one of our last in-person meetings, we had an extensive discussion about the composition and the voting membership of the committee. And the only question on the table was whether we should make the superintendent of schools a voting member of the committee. And there was no suggestion at that meeting or in that discussion that we, as the Board of Selectmen, should not be making those appointments, that it should be made by the moderator, or there's this other policy. The only question was, should the superintendent of schools be a voting member of the committee? And there was a back and forth about, does the permanent planning and building committee bylaw apply to the school building committee? And the answer clearly is no, because they're two different committees. And so that was the discussion. The only discussion we had about the authority and authorization of the committee was whether the superintendent, who is recommended by the MSBA to be on the committee, whether he'd have a vote or not. And so I think I have no issue if people want to adopt a bylaw to make clear that we're going to have some other process. We can clearly do that. But again, this seems to me to be more driven by a desire to get up and say the school building committee was not properly appointed and there was some confusion or something incorrect about it. And that's just not true. And it's just not true. And I don't think we should use an article at town meeting as a vehicle to, attack the legitimacy of a committee solely because you disagree with the decision. Right? I didn't get one question. I don't think we got one complaint, other than the question that the superintendent should not be a voting member, about the composition of the committee. Should other people be on there? I don't think, if someone had come forward and said, gee, we should have these other people on this committee beyond the ones who are there, I don't know that we would have objected to that either. I mean, I think we have taken appointees and appointments to committees before on community suggestion. I think we've been pretty open to that. And so kind of going back to the process and thinking about the process, well, you don't like the outcome, and so now we're going to attack the process, say it was illegitimate, it was done unfairly, and try to just generally cast this doubt on the legitimacy of the committee. I don't think that's proper. I don't think it's really an arguable point. I don't think it's an arguable point that a policy adopted by the school committee is a bylaw or charter provision. I don't think it's it's fine to say the committee's wrong. It's fine to say we're stupid. It's fine to say we're biased. It's fine to say we just, we're rolled over. We didn't make an independent judgment. It was all, whatever you want to say about what we did. You can make those arguments and say that, we're in somebody's pocket or whatever, and that's par for the course. But I think saying that it was illegitimately appointed when there was ample opportunity before it rendered any sort of judgment to say, here's the problem with it, I don't think that's appropriate. So I'll take a motion on this particular bylaw.
Sounds like you're looking for a recommend dismissal.
I would like to speak on this one as well.
Okay. I move the Board of Selectmen recommend dismissal of Article 30, the bylaw committee being formed to review the school building committee membership provisions.
And I guess since I don't really care about this one, where it's just to appoint a study committee.
All right, well, I will second it, thank us.
Okay.
Yep, go ahead.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
And Mr. Peterson?
I'm just going to
Abstain.
recuse myself on this one.
He's
and not
he's
vote.
taking a pass, he wants to hear it out.
Okay. So you're abstaining, you don't have to recuse
Abstaining, yeah.
yourself, you're abstaining.
Right.
Mr.
I will say though, Christine, just to let you know, that if it turns out that I've spent all that time on an illegal committee, I am sending the town a bill for my time on that. So just you might want to put that into the budget for next year. So otherwise I work for free, but.
Now I have to abstain because my judgment has been clouded by this.
Now we have to go back and look at the budget because I need a higher reserve fund transfer amount.
FYI, I think the moderator also is part of the appointment committee on the Tri-County School Rep.
Ah, there you go.
It is the Tri-County School Rep, and they appoint one member to a committee to appoint a treasurer.
All right, there you go.
So to be clear, let the record show that Mr. Marcucci and Mr. Murby voted aye, Mr. Peterson
I don't know if it's
abstained.
abstain or doesn't care. I don't know, you can vote.
That's abstained, we will.
Vote aye, no, present, or indifferent, I guess you can. All right, well, we're done with that on our town meeting recommendations, and then we can circle back at the end and see if anyone wants to speak on any in particular. Do we want to do that? Do we want to go through our assignments before we get to the policy and correspondence?
Yep.
All right, so let's just run through the articles and we'll see, we'll see who wants to speak to which. I think as to the operating budget, we can probably answer questions as they come up. I don't know if anyone needs to be the spokesman on the operating budget. I think to the extent there's any questions on the capital stabilization of the building, not 8, 10, 11, 12, I'll take those, given my spot on the capital. Also, I'll take 8 through 12 given my spot on the capital budget committee. 13 and 14, I want to talk about the water plant, if it comes up.
Do we need to?
I don't know that we need to, so, all right, no need to talk the water plant. What about the four solar, 16, 17, 18, 19? I can address the 16 on that. Anyone care to talk about 17, 18, or 19? I don't know that it'll come up.
I can talk about those, sure.
All right, Pete can talk about 17 through 19. Hinckley South, I can talk about that one. Pete, do you want to cover 21 and 22?
Sure, yeah.
Planning board, do we need to talk about any of the planning board ones? Gus, do you want to handle any of those if they come up? I don't know that we'll be we generally don't get asked about those, but.
Happy to be the fallback. I don't anticipate we'd be the prime ones to answer any planning board article, but I'm happy to do that.
All right. We probably all will be asked for our views on 29 and 30, I suspect, at some point, but I'm happy to speak to those. I will speak to those. Stormwater regulations, scenic road designation. Well, I'm going to get stuck with a lot of this. I was on a lot of committees this year. I guess I'll cover the 2 collective bargaining agreements, too, since I worked on those.
Yeah, I just think Mike should handle all the difficult questions that come.
Gus, do you want to talk about the retroactive frontline employee stipend?
No. I can't, yeah. I will.
I'm just,
I'll be-
I don't want you to feel left out because you're
I
typically
was
so
hoping, no, I just
reticent
want
about all
to,
this
I only
stuff.
want to handle the controversial questions that come out of right field.
Yeah, right. All right, so we're through those. Sounds like I better have my green tea ready for town meeting this year. All right, 12, the Board of Selectmen to discuss policy on correspondence. I think this is on here because at least I received, and Pete received, I don't know if you got it too, Gus, we received a request a couple of days before the due date to sign on to a letter to the MSBA requesting that the MSBA, I read whether briefly mandate net zero buildings or.
If you both got letters a couple days before the due date, then I'm not sure why we didn't discuss it at our last selectmen's meeting.
Oh, it was after the last meeting.
It was after the last meeting, and it had it had about a 6-hour deadline, so.
Yeah, so I would just say, because I read it, I saw it at a 6-hour deadline and just tossed it, so.
So
Gus.
for the, I'm the one who asked to have this on, and I take it Fred has elected not to show up, or he couldn't make it, Christine?
I did not get confirmation from Fred. I did invite him.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think Fred's probably here, Gus. He
I
planned
don't-
on coming.
Okay, well, so let me clarify what my perspective is, and partly, Pete, if Fred's not here, Pete, I guess you'll have to do the heavy
Fred is
lifting
here.
on.
He's masquerading as Howard Bernstein for the evening, so he's here. You can promote him if you'd like, Christine. Would you like Christine to promote Fred?
Oh, is that Fred?
That's Fred.
Okay.
I will promote.
Oh,
I didn't know he was incognito, sorry.
Fred, AKA Howard. All right, I think I'm the one who prompted putting this on the agenda. And I have, I think, potentially serious concern about how this unfolded. So in our last meeting, we had actually Energy Committee topics that were on the Board of Selectmen's agenda. And obviously it was a Board of Selectmen meeting. The following day, I got copied, I think, Pete, you were the one who initially, I think the first email came from you, that basically passed on an email that came in from a town councilor in Newton that basically had a letter attached to go to the MSBA conveying the recommendation or the encouragement by a number of town officials in a number of different towns to encourage, the email says to encourage the MSBA to require net zero. Interestingly, the letter itself doesn't say that. The letter basically encourages 3 specific steps around, all electric schools, power charging.
Stations
And so it was a little.
Elevations
Right.
near floodplains.
Right. My issue, and I want to be, and I'm happy to hear how I don't understand what happened here, but the day after a Board of Selectmen meeting, a letter comes from a Newton Town councilor asking anybody who's interested in signing on to this letter, and the letter itself is political. It's advocating a political position, and it's a political position that will directly affect a current ongoing school project here in Medfield, or could potentially affect it, and the cost of that. Basically saying, well, you got 6 hours to sign this if you want, and the reason is because we want to get this in for Earth Day. So the letter itself is a political act sent to the town with less than 12 hours of notice, say sign on or don't sign on. This comes on the heel of this same political group writing a letter a month ago that basically was brought before the Board of Selectmen, but we had to decide on the spot or else we wouldn't be able to make the deadline. And I deferred, and I ultimately decided not to sign that letter because I did not consider that letter to be in the best interest of this town, primarily because of Section 5 calling for more funding for public transportation. I'm sure Mayor Curtatone in Somerville is very happy to get our support for him to get better public transportation, but as far as I'm concerned, all that results in is a higher assessment for Medfield for public transportation. So I think it was not in the best interest of the town. That's the predecessor to what happened 2 weeks ago. If I understand correctly, and Pete, I'm going to apologize for shooting something at you, and Fred, I'm going to apologize for holding you up here, but I'm dead serious about this. There were 2 signatures that went in from Medfield, I think, citing your official titles, endorsing a political statement which had 0 discussion, 0 authorization. Fred, as far as I know, you didn't even get authorization from your own committee to submit that. So what we really have are 2 town officials operating under their official titles, being identified in a letter, I think, I haven't seen the letter, but I think identifying Medfield as being one of the towns endorsing this. And as far as I'm concerned, none of that was authorized. I actually think it was outside of proper procedures, proper government. Nothing was approved, nothing was discussed. I'm happy to be told I don't understand anything about this. I am registering an extremely strong concern against that kind of what I consider to be misuse of position. I'm happy for Mark to tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. And if I don't know what I'm talking about, I want to know what rules I can operate under as an individual selectman to spit out my own personal political views on things, represent them as coming from the town of Medfield, to whoever I feel I want to write to on whatever topics I think I'd like to write. I think this was a terrible breach. Perhaps the letter itself, in the overall circumstances, this is not blowing up the town. It's the reason I'm making a big deal about it right now, is because I don't ever want to see this happen again. So that's my view. I'm happy to hear the counter views. I was pretty irate at what I saw the day after we had our last Board of Selectmen's meeting.
Well, no one alleges that this was a town of Medfield opinion, Gus. I signed this letter as an individual who happens to be a select board member, and I did use that title. But
that's fine. How did you designate to the people that you sent your signature in that you were speaking for yourself personally, not as a representative of the town?
It just said select board member. It said my name and select board member. And that's
So
a
you
label
didn't.
that I have. As a select board member, I do take positions on issues. That's part of what I think I should be doing as a select board member. So I took a position on this particular issue, asking for electric schools, charging stations at the schools, and to build schools in areas where they wouldn't be underwater.
So the rule is then if I want to write a letter to someone else on a different issue, I should feel comfortable to identify myself as a select board member, not
Absolutely,
member of the
Gus.
Board of Selectmen.
Absolutely, Gus. You are entitled to have an opinion. When you joined the select board, you did not give up your right to have opinions.
As an individual. My question is, how did you identify that you were signing that as an individual and not speaking as a member of the Board of Selectmen? And Fred, in your case, how did you indicate you were expressing a personal opinion and not acting in your capacity as chairman of the Medfield Energy Committee?
Gus, nobody indicated that they were representing the town, that the town had made an official.
It had Medfield right at the top of it.
Yeah, and then it listed my signature and Fred's signature.
Right.
And we just listed our positions on town committees.
In the middle of a project with the MSBA, where we're trying to figure out how to make this project work well, those provisions potentially added cost to this project if the MSBA actually acted on it. My bigger issue isn't the merits of the argument. My big issue is, are we really free just to send out letters under our official title to any state agency we feel we'd like to, whether it's in the middle of dealing with our town on a major project or not? Because we have a personal opinion and we're using our position to advance, our official position, to advance our personal position. I just want to know the rules.
I think that absolutely, well, go ahead.
Well, here's what I would say I'm looking back at the letter, Peter. So I understand entirely where you're coming from, Gus, and I think the objectionable part of the letter, where I think it was objectionable, is that the way the signature block was set up.
Absolutely.
It was not, we are municipal elected officials writing to, because I agree, we as selectmen, we can write letters and identify ourselves all the time. We can endorse political candidates, we can say who we are, those are our titles. I think the objectionable part of it was the signature block was set up as though it was signed for the town, right? It was set up as Amherst and then the people under the name. And it was not clear that the people signing it were signing it in their capacities as individual municipal officials. So I think it lent a kind of an air of official endorsement coming from the town governments to it, right? In similar to, not quite as obvious, but similar to the letter on, I'm trying to remember what the issue was. There was because we would put the town seal on it and sign it. Pete and I signed the letter and you didn't.
Oh, the one last month.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the one last month,
Yeah,
right?
the same group of people.
Yeah.
The same advocacy.
Yeah. And so, you had marked up the letter and we went back and forth, but that was clearly, I think, identified, we talked about it, it was clearly identified.
That one was okay.
Yeah, I think the objectionable part of it was the signature block suggesting that it was coming on behalf of the town. So I don't think we have to get each other's permission to identify ourselves as selectmen and taking positions on.
As long as we identify that if we're not speaking as the Board of
Right,
Selectmen,
right. If you're
as long
speaking-
as we make it clear we're speaking as individuals.
We are individuals who are
Well,
committed.
and that's what we did. I mean, I was labeled as a select board member, not the Board of Selectmen, Gus, so.
I know, but no, but where did
And it's
you-
very evident when you look at this that, from Ashland, there's one person, from Boston, there's 7 or 8, Newton had like 10. So that it's very clear from the context that it's not an official town endorsement. It's
I don't think it's at
individuals.
all, I don't think it's at all clear from the context.
Oh, I think it was
And when
absolutely
it's
clear.
questionable, I mean, when, there's all kinds of times when we're just in meetings here in town, and something will come up and you'll ask, and there's times you're very careful to say, I'm speaking as an individual, being very clear. So what I'm looking for, well, then we can solve this. The two of you, could you send a letter into the MSBA to make very clear you were speaking as individuals and not as members of, in your case, the Board of Selectmen, in your case, not as the chair of the Medfield Energy Committee? Just send in a letter of clarification to the MSBA saying, just to be clear, this letter that was sent, that included our signatures, represented our individual opinions as individuals, not in our official capacity.
I think that's absolutely clear from the letter that was sent in, Gus, so.
It's well, it's not at all clear from the letter that was sent in, but it's a simple fix. If that's what you really intended, it's a very simple fix.
That's absolutely what was intended. That's what's clear from the letter.
It's not clear from the letter.
It
is not
absolutely is
clear from the letter at all.
It's signed as individuals, not as towns, Gus.
Well, the town was listed first, though. I mean, that's the.
Yeah, that's just to direct people to, these are the people from Amherst signing, these are the people from Andover signing, one from Andover.
So we should all feel free to express our political opinions even on matters that are currently pending in the town that may or may not be consistent with what the town's position is. And we can identify ourselves as our official capacity.
I would hope
in
that
the
you would
town.
feel free to speak as a select board member and let people know your opinions.
I
Yes.
would hope that you would make very clear when you're speaking as an individual, you're not speaking on behalf of the town. I don't have a problem at all with you being identified as a member of the Board of Selectmen.
That's what it
And
said, Gus.
speaking as an
That's what it
individual
said.
and making clear it's an individual opinion.
In the
So, a
context,
simple
it's
fix.
very clear
There's a simple
that
fix.
it was individuals
Send the
expressing an
MSBA
opinion.
Send the MSBA a follow-up message saying, just to be clear, my signature on the letter that you received on Earth Day from 79 plus signatories from different towns represented my individual opinion. I was not acting on behalf of the Board of
I
Selectmen,
don't
and I
feel
was
any
not
need
acting
to
on
do
the
that, Gus.
Medfield Energy.
It's very clear in the context. that-
What's coming very clear to me is that this was a political letter, and you both use it to advance your own political opinion in a manner that looked like you were representing the town. And what's also clear to me is you don't want to correct that.
Of course, it's a political opinion. It's a statement of opinion, and it relates to energy issues and how we should build schools in the future. Of course, it's a political opinion. And that's what we as select board people do. We take positions on issues.
No, what we as select board people, or Board of Selectmen members do is the three of us are collectively working to try to help this town go down a good path. What we don't do is operate on open loops. What we don't do is communicate with state agencies, and I don't believe even provide copies of what we communicated. I haven't seen the letter. I haven't seen how this permission was sent. We just communicated to a state agency that this town is dealing with right now on an extremely critical project, which has its own controversy, and we're sitting there just sending our own messages, including chairman of our committees. The chairmen of committees apparently are also empowered to use their position to advance political views that they personally hold.
Gus, nobody gives up their right to have an opinion because they serve on a town
Nobody
committee.
has the right to use their position to advance their personal opinion.
But I think though, we have a core agreement here.
You're good. You think that.
Appearances to the contrary,
Okay.
what you're really doing is agreeing, gentlemen. I mean, I think you both agree that it's improper for any of us to speak as though we're speaking on behalf of the town.
Right.
Right? We agree on that. And we also, I think, agree that we're entitled to express our personal opinions and identify our positions in expressing those personal opinions.
So long as we make it clear we're expressing a personal
And so it's a matter of how it is portrayed, how it is styled, how we are represented. And I think the core of this disagreement is that Pete thinks the letter was clear it was an individual capacity. You think it was not clear it was an individual capacity. I would say, just on my reading of the signature block and the rest, that I kind of agree with Gus on this, that I think the way it was done, it didn't clearly identify people in their individual capacity. I mean, I will say that, I didn't have the same reaction to it as Gus did for a number of reasons. I mean, I did get the request to sign the letter. I saw how short the due date was, and it just was like, well, this is way too short to sign any letter on any topic if there's no emergency, so I didn't bother to even spend time thinking about it because there wasn't enough time. So I think we generally agree on the ground rules.
Besides which, we would have had to deliberate whether to do it like we did in April.
Or I could have signed in my personal capacity. But I would not have signed under that signature block. I wouldn't have signed. I will say, when I saw it as a request for the town to take a position. Like, I didn't see it as we're trying to get individuals to take this view. And again, I just skimmed it, I saw the deadline, and I said, well, there's nothing to do about this.
The email request that I got was not in that context.
Yeah, that's how I interpreted it, like, similar to the letter we had signed 2 weeks before, where it clearly was coming on behalf of the town, and we both signed it, and it was, there's a majority of the board signing this letter and the rest. So I think that it would behoove, I don't know that we need a policy. We've discussed the policy, not adopting the policy, but I think it would behoove all of us to make sure we're clear in which capacity we're speaking.
Well, I think there's two levels of that. I mean, I think without a policy, I suddenly have some interesting ideas of what I can do without that policy, but I also think we need to differentiate whether appointed committees are free to reach out to state agencies as they see fit and communicate policy opinions to those state agencies. That aside from just the three of us as selectmen, at least we're the executive board that's representing the town, presumably running the town. But if every committee chair has now been empowered to basically use that position to talk to whatever state agencies they feel comfortable or interested in talking to at any point in time, regardless of what the town's interactions with those state agencies are, I think that's a problem.
Gus, you
I
should,
can understand that we may need to defer these policies till after the town meeting. So if this is something that requires thought, I'm okay with that.
I think
I'm
it-
just registering some strong objections to what just happened with regard to this letter.
No, I understand that. I understand that. I mean, but just looking ahead to the policy point of this, I mean, I think I would have a concern if you had committees that were kind of freelancing to the detriment of the town. If you had a committee we appoint, right? Other elected committees have their own jurisdictions, they do what they do. For committees that we appoint, if they are sort of working at cross purposes with the town, I would have an objection to that. I don't see this necessarily, you know, if the Medfield Energy Committee as the Medfield Energy Committee.
This is not, I'm not going, the Energy Committee didn't do anything.
No, but I'm talking policy. I'm moving on from the past and I'm looking to the future.
Okay, okay.
Right now. If you want to go back to the past, we can go back
Okay,
there in a
no,
second.
no,
But,
let's look ahead.
you know,
That's fine.
the challenge will be, and that when you draft this proposed policy, is how do you delineate it, right? Because I could see a situation where if you have a clear decision-making authority in the town, like let's take the most extreme example. If you had some provision that went through town meeting, was approved by town meeting, and let's say town meeting approved an article requesting a home rule petition for something. I don't think that an appointed committee of the board that might disagree with that town meeting article should be going to the legislature and saying, vote down our, you know, at some point, if you take on the role as a appointed, as a committee member, you know, at some point, you have to respect the process that exists within the town, and you're not going around it. This kind of an issue, I think, is a grayer area, right? Because it is, the MSBA is very relevant to the town of Medfield right now. But it's also speaking to a perspective matter of kind of general applicability around the Commonwealth. It's not a Medfield-specific issue.
It could-
But it does require judgment, right?
It could
does
become a
require
Medfield-specific
judgment,
issue.
and we all have to exercise that judgment, and sometimes we have to bite our tongues on stuff because, you know, we don't necessarily want to ruffle the wrong feathers at the wrong time for the good of the town overall. And so that's where I'm skeptical. I admire your drafting skills, but I'm skeptical that we're going to be able to come to a policy that would describe this, unless it's pretty simple, accurately. Because I don't think anybody gives up their right to speak on matters of public concern when they get elected, as long as they're clearly doing so on their own, right, and not speaking for the town. And so maybe we do need a policy, and I'd be happy to talk about one after town meeting. But I have thought about this since this was added to the agenda, and you know, I did have some of the same concerns you did, not to the same degree, but I think it's hard to craft a policy that doesn't unduly crib the ability of people to comment and participate and debate and be a part of discussions, while at the same time making clear that your discretion is not unfettered. And you obviously can't represent yourself or hold yourself out in those situations as speaking for the town government, for anything like that. And I think that, I don't think Pete intended to. I think
And
that's
the
a
letters-
matter of mens rea here. I don't think Pete intended that. I don't think this was him nefariously trying to seize the flag of the town of Medfield and charge off on our behalf. I don't doubt Pete's sincerity on his point. I disagree objectively as to how it appeared, because I do think it was, if you read it, the idea is we're putting the heft of all these towns behind this as opposed to just these particular individuals. But, you know, if the list had been alphabetical and then the person was identified after by title, that would be different. When it's alphabetical by town, there's sort of trying to give that goal to it. So I think it might be worthwhile.
So I see an easier way to get
Mr. Chairman?
policy than you do, so that for sure
Okay.
we can get to. But yes, Mr. Sorrell.
Only because you're talking about drafting a policy, I just want to point out the State Ethics Commission has a fairly detailed guidance on the proper use of titles of elected and appointed officials. A fairly complicated document, as I recall. But, so it's not in a vacuum. There actually is some legally binding guidance out there that would be a starting point.
I remember that from the last time I did the quiz, the online quiz.
So that's good news, except I'll take back that maybe the policy is not quite as easily drafted.
Well, I'm going to suggest that Gus can look up that state ethics guidance, because I only remember the
will
three
be happy
questions
to
I
do that.
answered, and put together a proposed policy on this topic. Fred, your hand is up.
Yeah, I showed up, and I apologize, Christine, that if I didn't respond appropriately, and I had no idea I signed on with the wrong name this when I logged on. Okay, so thanks for inviting me, though, and I appreciate that the four of you have discussed the question. I did go back and look, and of course, what was stated was correct, that the deadline was ridiculous for everyone, but in other words, just a few hours. But I did, and maybe it's because of what you just said, Mr. Sorrell, that it reminds me. I was reminded at that moment, what is the answer to this? What exactly am I allowed to do? What exactly am I allowed to do? Because I've taken the quiz, but I was a little fuzzy. So I'm looking at the email I sent in those hours, and it was addressed to Chris, not to blame anybody here, but I didn't even remember I did this, to Pete, Christine, Nick, Gus, Mike, and Mike Quinlan was in the list too. Mm-hmm. And I said, do you see any problem with me signing on as chair of MEC, of the Energy Committee? It's an open question. I didn't necessarily expect anybody would give me a definitive answer, but in case anybody wanted to, I was open to hearing it.
I would have.
Excuse me?
I would have.
And I'm sorry, Mark, that ends up being the critical mistake, is that I did not CC you at that time, and presuming you had time to look at it in those couple of hours. So I'm sorry for that. But having not received a definitive answer to the contrary, I did go ahead and sign it. And I did jot down a couple of notes about why I believe in Medfield. We in Medfield went through a learning curve on this Dale Street net zero question. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could indicate to MSBA our support? No need for every town to start from scratch and recreate the wheel. And also, by the way, my understanding, and Mike isn't, I don't think Mike Quinlan is on this call, but, and I should get clarification from him, but I thought he was also, separately from this letter, but he was also taking forward what we've learned here to, for other towns to benefit from the learning curve that we went through.
I did the footwork for you on that one, Fred, because I talked to Mike Quinlan to find out if he was in fact advocating what this letter said. And what he told me was that he's not advocating anything. If for no other reason he chose not to sign this because of his position, that he is in fact providing a briefing on what we've been doing and how we're approaching net zero to educate other towns. My issue here, and you already know this, Fred, I'm pushing, when in this area, I've been pushing for us to make cost-effective, cost-justified actions. And it's telling to me that this letter states that it is now cost-effective to do these things, but then says, so MSBA, we want you to require everybody to do it.
So I'm gonna pause this discussion. I don't mean to interrupt you, Gus, but this is a discussion on the Board of Selectmen discussing the policy and correspondence. It's starting to stray into a debate about the merits of the letter.
Well, yeah, in terms
which
of
is
the
the
merits,
debate we could have had if we had more time.
And fair enough, this is not a debate about the merits of signing or not.
Right.
It's about process.
So,
and that's correct.
And
I agree with you.
I think we have discussed the process at this point. And there's more to discuss on the far end of town meeting, but we're going to be just chock-a-blocking policies. It's going to be some of the most thrilling board meetings you've ever seen, going through all sorts of policies. All right. Thank you, Fred. I think we can say
yes, thank both of you for listening to my tirade. I'm serious about it, but I nonetheless...
Gus, as one final thing, I'd just point out that the letter says as municipal leaders. It doesn't say as towns, cities and towns.
Okay, yeah.
So...
All right, action items. Next first one is to approve a grant extension and authorize the chair to sign an agreement with Mass Development for the 2018 Technical Assistant Grant Extension for Cultural Facilities Fund Program for the Medfield State Hospital Chapel and Infirmary. So this, Christine, this is something we've already applied for.
You applied for, received it. I think Nick can actually give you the details. He was talking to Sarah earlier, but this was related back to the 2018 town meeting.
Okay.
Yes, the grant was for $30,000, and it was matched by a town meeting article for $25,000, and the Cultural Alliance of Medfield also kicked in $5,000. They've been spending the money down. Just this extension will extend our ability to spend this grant through this calendar year. There's about $7,000 left from Mass Development to come through.
Okay. Any questions? Pete?
No.
Gus? Nope. Motion?
I move that we approve the grant extension and authorize the chair to sign agreement with the Mass Development for the 2018 Technical Assistance Grant Extension for Cultural Facilities Fund Program for the Medfield State Hospital Chapel and Infirmary.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
And Mr. Murby, yes.
All right. Now, next is to approve a contract for fiscal years 23, 24, and 25 with Patriot Properties, Inc. to value, inspect, and list personal property accounts. Any questions, Pete?
Nope.
Yes. All right. You have a motion?
I move that we approve the contract for fiscal years 2023, 2024, and 2025 with Patriot Properties, Inc. to value, inspect, and list personal property accounts.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
And Mr. Murby, yes.
15, approve fiscal year 2021 appropriations transfer in the amount of $7,500 from the workers' compensation account to the liability insurance account. Christine, is this driven by something in particular? Nick or whoever's speaking to this?
So we have a couple of bills that are going to come due that we did not anticipate at the beginning of the year. So we have additional funds available in the workers' compensation account. So we can move that through the Municipal Modernization Act. We can move those once it's past May 1st.
Okay.
Actually, it might be April, but we're past the date we can do it.
All right. Is that to make a premium payment on the liability insurance, or?
Yes, I believe there's two, Nick, that are coming in.
Yeah, there's an endorsement to just due to some new vehicles, and then there's a deductible that was paid out for coverage by the town.
Gotcha. All right. Any questions, Pete?
No.
Gus?
Move that we approve fiscal year 2021 appropriations transfer in the amount of $7,500 from the workers' compensation account to the liability insurance account.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
And Mr. Murby, yes.
All right. Next one, approve request from Troop 10 for awards night at the Medfield State Hospital on June 8th, 2021 from 5:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m.
See, the town meeting should be over by then, right? It's kind of.
By June 8th?
I hope so.
Wow.
And just curious, what night is that? Is it a weeknight? It's probably a weeknight.
I believe it is a weeknight.
Okay.
And they're going to do this on the back field.
Oh, in the North Meadow? On the,
Yep. Correct.
Okay.
Where they had to sleep out the other night.
Yeah.
It's a Tuesday, actually.
Oh, Tuesday. I'm
Tuesday
sorry,
night.
Tuesday.
Okay. I move that we approve the request from Troop 10 to conduct their awards night at the Medfield State Hospital on June 8th, 2021 from 5:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
And Mr. Murby, yes.
Consent agenda, Medfield Garden Club requests signage advertising the annual plant sale. We have a motion to approve.
Just sitting there looking, when you only have one item, the consent agenda is kind of redundant, but
Yeah.
I move that we approve the Medfield Garden Club request for signage advertising the annual plant sale.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Murby, aye.
Town administrator updates, Christine.
I gave most of my updates because everything's been focused on town meeting, so I gave that earlier. But I did want to draw attention that the three of you have been invited to a court of honor on June 19th at the Rocky Woods Reservation, and Evelyn has your invitations for that if she has not put them in your mailbox.
I think we'll have a busy summer of courts of honor with the pent-up demand. It'll be good to have them again. So next meeting dates, right now, we don't need to meet next week. We'll know for sure by Thursday, or Friday, but it sounds like we may have next Tuesday off unless something comes up. And then we'll post a meeting for, I don't know, 4:30 or something on May 17th, unless we have a lot of stuff
Correct.
to do as well. All right, Selectmen reports, Pete.
The Medfield Foundation had a meeting, and MCAP had one of their major meetings that they do, I think, 3 or 4 times a year. A lot of interesting information that they were sharing from a survey that they did that they're going to be sharing with the town soon. So stay tuned for that. MCAP. Got a water bottle, too.
Nice. Gus?
I don't have anything particular to report. I've had a couple of conversations around warrant articles, and some of which were dealt with today, and some of the people were here, and given that they didn't have questions, I think we've satisfied those.
Yeah, nothing for me to report. We have an Affordable Housing Trust Board meeting on Thursday. The major item will be recommending the award of the contract for redoing our housing production plan, which is coming due this fall for renewal. And so hopefully it'll be in front of us in the planning board in the fall. So I saw that the census numbers were released for the reapportionment of the House of Representatives. Maybe we can keep our fingers crossed that we'll actually get our census numbers for other purposes as well, with respect to housing in particular, what our numbers will be for this upcoming decade. All right, informational, some ZBA stuff. All right, we are now at the end of the meeting, and we need to go into executive session to discuss the purchase, exchange, release of property on Ice House Road, and I've determined that discussing this matter in open session will be detrimental to the bargaining position of the town, et cetera, et cetera. And the open session will not reconvene at the conclusion of the executive session. Do we have a motion?
I
Gus?
think, Pete, you recuse yourself on this one.
Anything
so-
on Ice House Road, I need to recuse myself.
Yeah.
So I move that we go into executive session to discuss the purchase, exchange, or lease of property on Ice House Road. The chairman has determined that public discussion of this would be detrimental to the interests of the town, and we will not come back into open session at the conclusion of our closed session.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
And Mr. Murby, aye.
Right. Good night, everyone. Thank you.